Your family is supposed to be the people you trust most in the world, the ones who protect you when danger comes from outside. But in these cases, the danger didn't come from outside. It came from inside the home, from the one person everyone believed would never hurt them. And the crimes were so horrific that judges and juries decided only one punishment fit: death. Today we're covering every single family massacre killer currently sitting on death row in America, plus the ones who've already been executed. What you're about to hear will change how you think about the deadliest domestic crimes in modern history. Case number 1. Darlie Routier was a 26-year-old mother living in Rowlett, Texas. Rowlett is a suburb that sits about 20 miles east of Dallas. The area is mostly quiet, filled with middle-class families and brick homes with neatly trimmed lawns. On June 6, 1996, something happened in the Routier house that would turn this peaceful neighborhood into the center of one of the most talked-about murder cases in Texas history. Darlie lived there with her husband Darren and their 3 sons. The oldest was Devin, who was 6 years old. The middle child was Damon, who was 5. The youngest was Drake, who was only 7 months old. The family seemed to live a comfortable life from the outside. They had a nice house. They had expensive things. Darlie had blonde hair and wore nice jewelry. She had gotten breast implants. From what neighbors could see, everything looked fine. But underneath that surface, things were falling apart. Darren owned a small electronics testing business. The business had been doing well for a while, but by 1996 it was struggling. The family was deep in debt. They owed around $22,000. Their house was facing foreclosure. Just one day before the murders, Darren had applied for a $5,000 loan for a vacation, and the application was rejected. The financial pressure was building. Years later, Darren would admit to a private investigator that he had been thinking about staging a fake burglary. He had even talked to Darlie's stepfather about finding someone who could break into the house and steal items. The plan was that Darren would get the stolen items back from the burglar, then file an insurance claim and keep the money. Whether this plan went any further is unclear, but it shows the kind of desperation the family was dealing with in the weeks before the murders. On the night of June 5, 1996, the Routier family spent the evening at home. Darlie and her 2 older boys, Devin and Damon, were downstairs in the family room. They were watching television together. Darlie would later say they had been watching the movie. The family room was a comfortable space with a couch and a big screen television. At some point, all 3 of them fell asleep down there. Darren and the baby, Drake, were upstairs in the bedroom sleeping. The house was quiet. Everything seemed normal. But at 2:31 in the morning, a frantic 911 call came in. The caller was Darlie Routier. Her voice was panicked. She was screaming. She told the operator that someone had broken into her house. She said a man had stabbed her and her sons. On the recording, Darlie can be heard yelling that her babies were dying. She kept saying that someone came in while they were sleeping. The operator tried to keep her calm and told her that police were on the way. During that call, which lasted 5 minutes and 42 seconds, Darlie described what she claimed had happened. She said she woke up to Damon touching her and calling out for her. When she opened her eyes, she saw a man in the room. She said he was a white male wearing dark clothing, maybe jeans and a black shirt. She described him as having long hair. She said she tried to go after him. She claimed she chased him through the kitchen toward the garage. She said the man ran out through the utility room. She said she found a knife on the floor and picked it up. Then she realized that she and her sons had been hurt. She called for Darren. On the 911 call, there is a moment about 43 seconds in where a male voice can first be heard. That was Darren. He had come running downstairs. When he got to the family room, he found his 2 sons on the floor, covered in blood. Devin had been stabbed twice in the chest. The wounds were so deep that in one case, the knife had gone almost completely through his small body. Damon had been stabbed multiple times in the back. He had 4 stab wounds in his back, plus wounds to his left shoulder and left upper back. Darren tried to perform CPR on Devin, but it was already too late. Devin was dead. Darlie also had injuries. She had 2 wounds on her right forearm. She had 1 wound on her left shoulder, and her throat had been cut. The cut on her throat was serious. It came within 2 millimeters of her carotid artery. If the knife had gone just slightly deeper, she would have bled to death within minutes. Police arrived at the scene within 3 minutes of the 911 call ending. When they walked in, they found a horrific scene. Blood was everywhere. Devon was already dead on the floor. Damon was still clinging to life, but he died shortly after. He either died at the scene or on the way to the hospital in the ambulance, depending on which account you read. Darlie was walking around, bleeding from her wounds. She was talking to the officers, repeating her story about the intruder. Paramedics quickly loaded Darlie into an ambulance and took her to Baylor University Medical Center. Doctors treated her injuries and released her 2 days later. While this was happening, police started looking at the crime scene more carefully. They found several things that made them suspicious. First, they found a knife on the kitchen counter. It was covered in blood. Testing would later show that the knife belonged to the routiers. It came from a wooden knife block that sat on their kitchen counter. The knife matched the empty slot in that block. So the murder weapon had come from inside the house, not from an intruder who brought his own weapon. Second, police noticed that the garage had a window screen that had been cut. Darlie had said the intruder escaped through the garage, but when investigators looked closer, they found problems with that story. There was no blood in the garage. If someone had just stabbed 3 people and run through that space, you would expect to find blood drops. There were none. The windowsills in the garage were covered in dust, including the window that had the cut screen. The dust was completely undisturbed. If someone had climbed through that window, the dust would have been disturbed. There was also a flower bed outside the garage windows. The mulch in that flower bed was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs that anyone had walked through there. The back gate that led to the alley was closed when police arrived. That gate was difficult to open and close. If someone had run through it in a panic, they probably would have left it open. But it was shut. Third, police noticed blood evidence that did not match Darlie's story. Darlie had said she chased the intruder through the kitchen, but the blood drops in the kitchen did not look like they came from someone running. They looked like they came from someone standing still or moving slowly. There was also blood evidence around the kitchen sink. When investigators sprayed the area with a chemical called luminol, which makes blood glow even after it has been cleaned up, they found that blood had been on the counter near the sink. Someone had tried to clean it. Investigators believed that Darlie had stood at that sink and cut her own throat and arm. There was also blood evidence on Darlie's nightshirt that became a major point at trial. Blood spatter expert Tom Bevel testified that blood on the back shoulder area of the nightshirt showed a pattern that matched someone raising a knife over their head and bringing it down repeatedly, like someone stabbing. The prosecution said this proved Darlie was the one stabbing her sons. There were also 4 holes cut in Darlie's nightshirt that did not match any wounds on her body. The prosecution suggested she had cut those holes to try to make it look like the intruder had attacked her clothing. One piece of evidence that did not fit neatly into the prosecution's timeline was a sock. Police found a sock in the alley behind the Routier house, about 75 yards away from the home. Testing showed the sock had blood from both Devon and Damon on it. The sock matched other socks in the Routier house that belonged to Darren. The prosecution said that Darlie had taken that sock and run down the alley to plant it, trying to make it look like an intruder had fled that way. But Darlie's defense attorneys pointed out a major problem with this theory. The 911 call lasted 5 minutes and 42 seconds. Police arrived within 1 minute after the call ended. Medical experts said that Damon could have only survived his wounds for about 9 minutes total. If you do the math, that leaves barely 2 minutes for Darlie to stab both boys multiple times, run 75 yards down a dark alley barefoot, drop the sock, run 75 yards back, cut the window screen, stand at the sink and cut her own throat and arms, stage the rest of the crime scene, and then call 911. Defense attorney said it was physically impossible. Prosecutor said she had enough time if she moved quickly. Another piece of evidence that caused debate was a fingerprint. Police found a bloody fingerprint on the garage windowsill. In 2002, testing showed that the fingerprint did not belong to anyone in the Routier family. It did not match any of the police officers who had been at the scene either. Supporters of Darlie said this proved an intruder had been there, but a fingerprint expert later testified that he could not completely rule out the possibility that the print was Darlie's right ring finger. The print has never been conclusively identified. When police looked into a possible motive, they focused on the family's financial problems. Both Devin and Damon had life insurance policies. The policies were worth $5,000 each. The prosecution suggested that Darlie killed her sons to collect that insurance money. The defense argued that $10,000 total was barely enough to cover funeral expenses, let alone solve their financial problems. The defense also pointed out that if Darlie was willing to kill for insurance money, why wouldn't she kill Darren instead? He had an $800,000 life insurance policy. That would have solved all their money problems. And why would she leave Drake alive? If she killed her two older sons, why not kill the baby too? The prosecution never had a clear answer for these questions. 13 days after the murders, on June 18, 1996, police arrested Darlie Routier. They charged her with capital murder. At a press conference, Rowlett Police Chief Randall Posey said that the white male suspect Darlie described never existed. He said they believed Darlie's wounds were self-inflicted. When Darlie was told she was being arrested, officers said she showed no emotion. One officer later testified that she never cried until the moment they told her she was under arrest. Then she began to cry. Darlie was held in jail while she waited for trial. During this time, something happened that would become one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire case. 8 days after the murders, on what would have been Devin's 7th birthday, Darlie and her family went to the cemetery. They held a birthday party at the gravesite. There were balloons. There were presents. An airplane flew overhead, pulling a banner that said, "Happy Birthday." Darlie's sister had brought cans of silly string. Darlie and other family members sprayed the silly string on the graves while singing Happy Birthday. A local news crew had been invited to film the event. The footage showed Darlie smiling. She was laughing. She was chewing gum. She seemed happy. When people saw that footage, many were shocked. This was a mother who had just lost 2 children 8 days earlier. Why was she smiling and laughing at their graves? Prosecutors would later use this video as a key piece of evidence at trial. They said it showed that Darlie had no real grief. They said it proved she was cold and had no remorse for what she had done. What the news footage did not show was that earlier that same day, before the silly string party, the family had held a solemn prayer service at the gravesite. During that service, Darlie and her family members were crying. They were sad. They were grieving. But the cameras had not filmed that part. The cameras only filmed the silly string party. Darlie's family and supporters said that the silly string party was Darlie's way of celebrating Devin's life. Devin would have been 7 years old that day. Darlie wanted to give him the birthday party he would have wanted. She wanted to honor him. Her supporters said that people grieve in different ways, and that judging someone's grief is unfair. But prosecutors saw it differently. To them, the video was proof that Darlie did not care that her children were dead. Darlie's trial began on January 6, 1997, in Kerrville, Texas. The trial had been moved from Rowlett because there had been so much media coverage that finding an impartial jury in the Dallas area seemed impossible. The prosecution built their case on several key points. They argued that the crime scene had been staged. They argued that Darlie's wounds were self-inflicted. They argued that financial problems gave Darlie a motive. They painted a picture of Darlie as a selfish, materialistic woman who cared more about her appearance and her lifestyle than about her children. The prosecution called Darlie a self-centered woman. They said she was cold enough to murder her own sons. They showed the jury the silly string video. They showed it multiple times. Jurors would later say they watched that video at least 7 times during deliberations. The prosecution also brought in witnesses to talk about Darlie as a mother. They had witnesses testify that Darlie had breast implants. They had witnesses testify that she did not take her children to church regularly. They had witnesses testify that she went out with friends the night before Mother's Day. They had witnesses testify that she wore expensive jewelry. The prosecution wanted the jury to see Darlie as vain and selfish. Crime scene consultant James Cron testified that, in his opinion, the scene had been staged. He said there was a lack of evidence that an intruder had been there. He said the whole scene indicated to him that no one from outside the house had come in. Blood spatter expert Tom Bevel testified about the blood evidence. He explained his theory that the blood patterns on Darlie's nightshirt proved she was the one doing the stabbing. The prosecution also focused on Darlie's behavior during and after the 911 call. They pointed out that during the call, while her sons were dying on the floor in front of her, Darlie mentioned being worried about fingerprints on the knife. She said on the call that she wondered if they could have gotten prints from the knife. Prosecutors said this showed she was thinking about evidence, not about saving her children. They also pointed out that after the call ended, Darlie did not follow the paramedics when they took Damon away in the ambulance. She did not ask where they were taking him. Hospital staff later testified that her behavior after Damon died was unusual for a mother who had just lost 2 children. The defense tried to argue that Darlie was innocent. They said there was no motive. They said there was no confession. They said there were no witnesses who saw her do it. They argued that it was unrealistic to think Darlie could have staged such an elaborate crime scene in such a short amount of time. The defense brought in medical experts who said they believed Darlie's wound to her throat was too severe to have been self-inflicted. A medical examiner from San Antonio named Vincent DeMaio testified that the throat wound came within 2 millimeters of the carotid artery. He said based on his experience looking at self-inflicted wounds, Darlie's wound did not fit that pattern. But this testimony conflicted with what the doctors who treated Darlie at the hospital had told police. Those doctors had said the wounds could have been self-inflicted. They described the wounds as superficial. The defense also tried to present evidence about Darlie's emotional state. They had hospital nurses testify that when Darlie was in the hospital right after the attack, she was crying, she was frightened, she was visibly upset. They wanted to show that Darlie was genuinely traumatized. But the prosecution had their own witnesses who said Darlie did not act like a grieving mother. They said she seemed more worried about her appearance. Prosecutors said that on the night before Darlie was supposed to testify at trial, she was concerned that her hair was not done properly. Darlie's defense attorneys advised her not to testify. They thought it was too risky. But Darlie insisted on taking the stand. She wanted to tell her side of the story. She wanted the jury to hear from her directly. Taking the stand turned out to be a mistake. Under cross-examination by prosecutor Toby Shook, Darlie struggled. She became defensive. Her story had some inconsistencies. At one point during the 911 call, she had said she was fighting with the intruder. But at trial, she said she meant to say she was frightened, not fighting. She claimed she had made a mistake in the moment. The prosecution used this against her. They said she was changing her story. Darlie also had trouble explaining some of the physical evidence. She could not explain why there was no blood on the couch where her head had supposedly been resting when she was attacked. She could not explain the blood evidence in the kitchen that suggested she had been standing at the sink. She could not explain the cuts in her nightshirt that did not match wounds on her body. After 8 hours of deliberation, on February 4th, 1997, the jury found Darlie Routier guilty of capital murder in the death of Damon. The jury had to decide between a death sentence and life in prison. After hearing more testimony during the sentencing phase, they chose death. On February 5th, 1997, Darlie was officially sentenced to death. She was taken to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, which is where female death row inmates are housed. Darlie has never stopped saying she is innocent. She has never admitted to killing her sons. Her family has stood by her from the beginning. Her mother, Darlie Key, has been one of her most vocal supporters. Darlie Key has given interviews saying she believes her daughter is innocent. She has said that the police focused on Darlie too quickly and ignored other possibilities. She has said that people judged Darlie unfairly based on her appearance and the silly string video. Over the years, several journalists and investigators have looked into the case and come away with doubts about Darlie's guilt. A reporter named Kathy Cruz wrote a book called Dateline Purgatory about the case. Cruz interviewed Darlie on death row. After her investigation, Cruz said she believed it was very likely that the state got the case wrong. Barbara Davis, who wrote a true crime book about the case called Precious Angels, originally believed Darlie was guilty, but later, after seeing photographs of Darlie's injuries that were not shown to the jury, Davis changed her mind. She said the photos showed bruises all over Darlie's body, in places she could not have reached herself. Davis said she now believed Darlie had fought for her life. However, prosecutors disagreed. They said every photograph of Darlie's injuries was admitted into evidence at trial, and that the jury had seen them. The case has been featured in multiple documentaries and television shows. In 2013, the Investigation Discovery Network aired an episode about Darlie. In 2015, a CNN documentary covered the case. In 2018, ABC aired a multi-part documentary series called The Last Defense that examined Darlie's case. In 2019, ABC aired another 2-hour special about her on the show 2020. In 2020, British journalist Susanna Reid traveled to Texas to interview Darlie for a documentary. All of these documentaries brought new attention to the case and raised questions about whether Darlie received a fair trial. One of the biggest ongoing issues in the case is DNA testing. In 2008, a judge ordered that certain pieces of evidence could be tested using newer DNA technology that was not available in 1996. The testing was supposed to include the sock found in the alley, blood evidence from the crime scene, fingernail scrapings, and other items. As of 2024, this DNA testing still has not been completed. The process has dragged on for over 15 years. Darlie's defense attorney, Stephen Cooper, has said they are currently in the 3rd round of DNA testing. Cooper has said there are pieces of evidence that have never been tested. He has said there are blood samples at the crime scene that have never been identified as belonging to Darlie or one of the boys. He said he is hopeful that the DNA testing will reveal something that could help get Darlie a new trial, but he has also admitted that so far, nothing groundbreaking has been found. Some items that were tested did not produce useful results. A pubic hair found at the scene was tested and gave no useful information. A bloody fingerprint that was found at the scene had degraded too much over time to yield DNA results. The Dallas County District Attorney's Office has said that once all the DNA testing is complete, they will review the findings. After that, Darlie's petition to overturn her conviction, which was first filed in 2005, will finally be able to move forward. But after nearly 30 years, that process is still ongoing. Prosecutors who worked on the case have said they remain confident in the conviction. Toby Shook, one of the lead prosecutors, has said he does not believe the DNA testing will change anything. He has said the case against Darlie was strong and that the evidence clearly pointed to her guilt. Darlie's husband, Darren, stood by her throughout the trial. He insisted she was innocent. He said she could never have done something like this. But in 2011, after 15 years of Darlie being on death row, Darren and Darlie divorced. Darren currently lives in Lubbock, Texas with their son Drake, who is now in his late 20s. Drake was only a baby when his brothers were killed. He has no memory of that night. He has grown up visiting his mother on death row. Both Darren and Drake have declined requests for interviews over the years. One of the most controversial aspects of the case is the role that Darren may have played. After the trial, a private investigator working on Darlie's appeal got Darren to admit something significant. Darren admitted that in the spring of 1996, a few months before the murders, He had asked Darley's stepfather if he knew anyone who could stage a fake burglary at their house. Darren said he was planning an insurance scam because his business was failing and he was deeply in debt. The plan was that someone would break in and steal items. Then Darren would get the items back and file an insurance claim. When confronted about this admission, Darren at first denied it. But when shown written statements from Darley's stepfather and the investigator, he confirmed that yes, he had talked about this plan. He also said it was possible he had mentioned the plan to other people, including some men in Rowlett who were known to be involved in car theft. This admission was never presented at Darley's trial because Darren did not tell anyone about it until after she had already been convicted. Darley's defense attorneys have argued that if the jury had known about Darren's fake burglary plan, it could have created reasonable doubt. It would have given the jury another possible explanation for what happened that night. Maybe the fake burglary plan went wrong. Maybe someone Darren talked to took it upon themselves to break into the house. Maybe Darren was more involved than he admitted. These are all questions that were never explored at trial. There was also a polygraph test that Darren took years after the trial. The test was administered by a police officer in Waco at the request of a millionaire named Brian Pardo, who was funding an independent investigation into the case. According to reports, Darren failed the polygraph when answering 4 questions. Was he involved in any plan to commit a crime at his house on June 6, 1996? Did he stab Darley? Did he know who planted the sock in the alley? Could he name the person who stabbed Darley? Darren was shown to be lying when he answered no to all 4 questions. Darren later said he believed he was manipulated by the examiner and that he was upset during the test, which affected the results. He denied being involved in the murders, but the failed polygraph has added to the questions surrounding his potential involvement. Darley's defense attorneys have argued that Darren should have been investigated more thoroughly. They said police and prosecutors focused so intensely on Darley that they never seriously considered other suspects. There was also an allegation that Doug Mulder, Darley's original defense attorney, had a conflict of interest. Mulder had previously represented Darren in some legal matters. One of Darley's later attorneys filed an appeal claiming that this created a conflict of interest because Mulder may have been reluctant to pursue any defense strategy that would implicate Darren. That appeal was rejected. As of January 2026, Darley Routier remains on death row in Texas. She is one of a small number of women on death row in the state. Texas has not set an execution date for her. The state has not executed a woman since 1863. Texas has a moratorium on executions in general due to issues with the drugs used for lethal injection. But even without that moratorium, Darley would not be close to an execution date because her appeals are still ongoing. The case continues to divide people. Some believe the evidence clearly shows Darley is guilty and that justice was served. They point to the mountain of circumstantial evidence. They point to the lack of any evidence of an intruder. They point to the inconsistencies in Darley's story. They point to the blood evidence. They point to the knife coming from inside the house. They point to the silly string video. To them, Darley is exactly where she belongs. Others believe Darley was wrongly convicted. They point to the DNA evidence that has never been fully tested. They point to the unidentified fingerprint. They point to the bloody sock in the alley. They point to Darren's admission about planning a fake burglary. They point to the fact that Darley's throat wound came within 2 millimeters of killing her. They point to the impossibly tight timeline the prosecution proposed. They point to the lack of any clear motive. They point to the fact that Darley left Drake alive if she was supposedly killing her children. To them, Darley is an innocent woman who has been on death row for nearly 30 years for a crime she did not commit. The truth is that without the completed DNA testing and without more information coming to light, the case remains in limbo. Darley sits in a cell in Gatesville, Texas, waiting for the legal process to move forward. Her attorneys continue to file motions and appeals. The Dallas County District Attorney's Office continues to maintain that she is guilty. And the families of Devin and Damon Routier, who would be in their 30s now if they had lived, are left without answers. Darlie has spent more time on death row than her sons ever spent alive. She has missed watching Drake grow up, except for prison visits. She has maintained her innocence for 29 years. Whether she is truly innocent or truly guilty, the Darlie Routier case stands as one of the most controversial and debated capital murder cases in Texas history. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the second case breakdown. Case number 2. Massacre Damas was born in Haiti on July 2, 1976. His childhood was difficult. He grew up surrounded by domestic violence and poverty. His parents raised him as an evangelical Christian until he was 10 years old. Then his parents left Haiti and moved to the United States. They left Massacre behind with extended family members who practiced Haitian voodoo. Massacre stayed in Haiti for 9 more years. When he was 19 years old, he left Haiti and moved to the United States to start a new life. He settled in Florida. As an adult, Massacre identified as an evangelical Christian, not a voodoo practitioner. He worked as a chef at a local ale house in Naples, Florida. He was proud of his cooking skills. He described himself as the best of the best in his line of work. Massacre met a woman named Guerline. She was also from Haiti. They dated for many years. They had 5 children together before they got married. The oldest was a boy named Meshach. Then came Maven, who was a boy. Then Marvin, another boy. Then Megan, a girl. 4 of the children were born before Massacre and Guerline officially married. They finally got married in April 2006. After they married, they had 1 more child, a baby girl named Morgan. By 2009, the family was living in a townhouse in North Naples, which is part of Collier County, Florida. Naples is a coastal city on the southwestern side of Florida. The area is known for being peaceful and safe. Many families live there. The Damas family seemed like they were building a normal life. But underneath the surface, serious problems were developing. After Massacre and Guerline got married, their relationship started to fall apart. According to Massacre, they began arguing frequently. Massacre became extremely jealous. He suspected that Guerline was having an affair with another man. He started checking up on her constantly. He would visit her at her job unannounced. He would go through her cell phone to see who she was calling and texting. Guerline felt suffocated by his jealousy and his controlling behavior. The situation escalated into violence. On January 2nd, 2009, Massacre and Guerline got into a heated argument about her supposed unfaithfulness. During the argument, Massacre slapped Guerline across the face. She was holding their baby Morgan at the time. The slap caused Guerline to drop the baby onto the floor. This incident resulted in Massacre being arrested for domestic violence battery. The case went through the court system. In June 2009, Massacre pleaded no contest to misdemeanor battery charges. He did not serve any jail time. As part of the legal process, the Department of Children and Families got involved. DCF started investigating the family because of the domestic violence. Guerline became worried that DCF would try to take her children away from her. She was scared of losing custody. To try to protect herself and the children, Guerline changed the locks on the house. She did not want Massacre to be able to come inside anymore. There was a no-contact order in place that said Massacre was supposed to stay away from Guerline. But Massacre violated that order repeatedly. After his restaurant shift would end at 3 in the morning, he would drive by the house. He would use a friend's car instead of his own vehicle, so the police would not realize he was violating the order. He would sit in the car outside the townhouse, watching Guerline through the windows. He would sit there thinking about his children. He claimed he just wanted to see them. One night he could not take it anymore. He broke a window while Guerline was home and climbed inside the house so he could see the children. After this incident, Guerline decided to move. She took the children and moved out of the house where the domestic violence incident had happened. They moved into a different townhouse, also in North Naples. Eventually, toward the end of March 2009, the no-contact order was lifted. Gurleen made the decision to allow Massacre to move back in with her and the children. It seemed like maybe they were going to try to work things out. They even attended an anger management class together on September 16, 2009. But Massacre's jealousy had not gone away. He was still suspicious. He was still watching Gurleen. He was still convinced she was being unfaithful to him. On September 17, 2009, the day after they attended the anger management class together, Massacre went to a Walmart store. He purchased 3 items. He bought a roll of duct tape, he bought a fillet knife, and he bought some chewing gum. The knife cost $5. After making these purchases, Massacre went back to the townhouse. But he did not go inside right away. Instead, he went around to the back of the house. The townhouse had a screened-in lanai, which is like a screened-in porch area. From outside the lanai, Massacre could see into the house. He stood there and watched Gurleen. She was on her cell phone. She was talking to someone. She was laughing. She looked happy. Massacre watched her for more than an hour, maybe even more than 2 hours. He just stood there in the dark, watching his wife through the screen, listening to her laugh on the phone. Around midnight or shortly after, Massacre made his move. He tore the screen door off the lanai. He knew the sliding glass door behind it did not lock properly. He was able to open it easily. He stepped inside the house. When Gurleen saw him, she screamed. She told him not to touch her. Massacre punched her. At that moment, Massacre later said, he knew he was going to go to jail. Gurleen tried to fight back. According to Massacre's own statements to police, Gurleen was fighting him in the kitchen. She was trying to get away from him. She was trying to get out of the house so she could call the police or call a neighbor for help. Massacre grabbed her by the hair. He pulled her hair back. Then he used the fillet knife he had just bought at Walmart to cut her throat from behind. Gurleen fought for her life, but Massacre overpowered her. After he killed Gurleen, Massacre took the roll of duct tape. He used 55 yards of duct tape to bind Gurleen's body. He wrapped duct tape around her legs, from just above her knees to just above her ankles. He also loosely wrapped her torso and hands with an electrical cord. He put a black trash bag over her head. Then he dragged her body into a small bathroom that was located under the stairs on the first floor of the townhouse. He left her body face down on the floor of that small bathroom in a large pool of her own blood. Then Massacre went upstairs. The 5 children were asleep in their bedrooms. Massacre was 9 years old, Maven was 6, Marvin was 5, Megan was 3. Morgan was only 19 months old, barely more than a year old. One by one, Massacre went to where his children were sleeping and slit their throats with the same knife. In one bedroom, he found Massacre, his oldest son, asleep on a bed. He cut Massacre's throat. The knife wounds were so severe that they nearly went all the way around his neck. The bed was broken, suggesting there had been a struggle. In another bedroom, he found the 4 younger children. He slit the throat of each one of them. 5-year-old Marvin's throat was cut so deeply that he was almost decapitated. The cuts were so violent that the blade of the $5 fillet knife became bent from the force. In statements to police later, Massacre admitted that while he was killing his children, he thought about letting 2 of them live. But then he decided against it. He did not want his mother-in-law to have custody of any of them. So he killed all 5. After murdering his entire family, Massacre stayed in the townhouse until 7 o'clock the next morning. He spent those hours thinking about how he was going to kill himself. But he could not bring himself to do it. He later told reporters that he wanted to take his own life after what he had done, but he did not have the courage to go through with it. Because if you kill yourself, you do not go to heaven. Around 7 in the morning on September 18th, Massacre changed out of his bloody clothes. He packed a suitcase. He got into his GMC Yukon Denali and drove to Miami International Airport, which is about a 2-hour drive from Naples. He arrived at the airport parking garage at around 6:40 in the morning. He parked his car and went into the terminal. He paid cash for a one-way ticket to Port-au-Prince, Haiti. The flight departed at around 9:50 in the morning. Massacre flew back to the country where he had been born. Meanwhile, back in Naples, Guerline's family was starting to worry. Guerline had not shown up for work. She had not called. The children had missed school on Friday. Nobody had heard from Guerline since Thursday, September 17th. This was completely out of character for her. Guerline was responsible. She always went to work. She always made sure her children got to school. Her family knew about the history of domestic violence between Guerline and Massacre. They were concerned. On Saturday morning, September 19th, Guerline's family filed a missing person report with the Collier County Sheriff's Office. They asked police to do a welfare check on Guerline and the children. Actually, this was the second time police had been asked to check on the family. On Friday, September 18th, the day after the murders, a family member had asked police to do a welfare check. Officers went to the townhouse that day. They knocked on the door. Nobody answered. The officers looked around the outside of the house. They did not see anything that seemed suspicious or out of place, so they left. But on Saturday, the family became even more worried. They filed an official missing person report. Police went back to the townhouse. This time, they brought the property manager with them so they could get a key to unlock the front door. Officers arrived at the townhouse at about 7 o'clock that evening, around 7:03 p.m. The property manager unlocked the front door. The officers stepped inside. Immediately, they noticed something wrong. There was a closed door under the stairs. There was a red substance leaking out from under that door. It looked like blood. There were floor rugs pushed up against the bottom of the door, like someone had tried to cover up whatever was leaking out. The officers realized they might be looking at a violent crime scene. They also worried that whoever had committed the crime might still be inside the house. So they withdrew from the townhouse and called for backup. Once backup arrived and they felt it was safe to proceed, officers pried open the locked door under the stairs. Inside the small bathroom, they found the body of Guerline Damas. She was lying face down in the floor, in a large pool of dried blood. Her head was covered with a black trash bag. Her limbs were bound with duct tape. Her throat had been cut. Officers then went upstairs to check on the children. They found Mishak in one bedroom, dead on the bed with his throat cut. In another bedroom, they found the 4 other children, also dead, with their throats cut. The scene was described by Collier County Sheriff Kevin Rambosk as horrific. It was the worst mass murder in Collier County history. Police immediately began trying to figure out who had done this. Massacre Damas was nowhere to be found. His vehicle was not at the townhouse. Police started searching for him. They tracked his GMC Yukon Denali to Miami International Airport. They found the vehicle in the airport parking garage. Records showed that Massacre had entered the garage early on the morning of September 18th. Police checked flight records and discovered that Massacre had boarded a flight to Haiti that morning. He had used a one-way ticket. Law enforcement contacted the FBI and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement for help. The FBI's legal office in the Dominican Republic notified authorities that a man believed to be Massacre Damas had been taken into custody in Port-au-Prince by the Haitian National Police. This happened on Monday, September 21st, 2009. Information from the Collier County Sheriff's Office indicated that Damas was found hiding near a hotel in the capital city. On September 22nd, 2009, a judge in Collier County signed an arrest warrant charging Massacre Damas with 6 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. The warrant was based on evidence collected at the crime scene and on statements that Massacre had already made to federal agents after being detained in Haiti. On September 23, 2009, United States Marshal Service agents formally apprehended Massacre in Port-au-Prince. Massacre was not trying to fight the arrest. He voluntarily provided a lengthy statement to the agents. In that statement, he said things like, "I know what I did was wrong," and "bad spirits made me do it." He asked the agents, "You think I want to live after what I did?" Massacre also spoke to a reporter from the Naples Daily News while he was being led into a Haitian police vehicle. He admitted to the murders. He told the reporter, "Yes, I killed them," when asked if he had killed his wife and children. When the reporter asked him why he did it, Massacre responded, "Only God knows." He also said that he wished to receive the death penalty for his crimes. He said he had gone to Haiti to say goodbye to his family, and that he had planned to turn himself in. Massacre was transported back to Collier County by the U.S. Marshal Service. When he arrived back in Florida, he was placed in jail and held without bond. From the very beginning, Massacre's behavior in custody was strange and disturbing. He refused to cooperate with his attorneys. He refused to cooperate with the court. He had what experts described as hyper-religious ideation. He claimed that his actions had been carried out because of a hex that was placed on him by his mother-in-law. He said a visible spirit had helped him commit the murders, though not an actual physical person. He claimed he was possessed at the time of the killings. Throughout the years that his case went through the court system, Massacre's competency to stand trial was constantly questioned. Between 2009 and 2017, he was evaluated for mental competency 12 times by 5 different mental health experts. The court had to issue orders about his competency in 2011, twice in 2014, and again in 2017. Massacre's behavior while in jail became increasingly bizarre. He refused to eat for long periods of time. He refused to shower. In one reported incident, Massacre went without showering for over 30 consecutive days. Local news sources reported that the smell coming from his cell became so bad that it made other inmates physically ill. The stench was overwhelming. Massacre also routinely refused to follow orders from jail deputies. He was the subject of numerous disciplinary actions. In at least one incident, deputies had to spray him with pepper spray after he hid under his bunk and refused to come out. When Massacre was transported to court appearances, it often required multiple deputies. Sometimes he had to be secured to a safety restraint chair for the safety of the staff. His courtroom behavior became a spectacle that attracted media attention. During one court appearance in August 2010, Massacre started singing out loud. His lawyer and the judge told him to calm down and be quiet. He stopped singing for a while, but then as the hearing was almost over, he started singing again. He would have outbursts. He would shout. He was unpredictable. At one hearing in October 2017, Massacre hand-wrote a note to the judge that said, "Go ahead, continue your work. May my blood be upon your shoulders." He signed the note COG, which stood for Child of God. He also had a pair of shoes that he wore to court that had Bible verse Romans 5:17 written on them. He told people that his new purpose was to share the gospel. Despite all of this strange behavior, and despite years of competency questions, the courts ultimately ruled that Massacre was competent to stand trial. Experts determined that while he had mental health issues and displayed bizarre religious behavior, he understood the charges against him and the legal proceedings. On September 5, 2017, more than 8 years after the murders, Massacre Damas pleaded guilty to all 6 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. He pleaded guilty to murdering Guerlain. He pleaded guilty to murdering Meshach. He pleaded guilty to murdering Maven. He pleaded guilty to murdering Marvin. He pleaded guilty to murdering Megan. And he pleaded guilty to murdering Morgan. By pleading guilty, Massacre waived his right to have a jury trial. He also waived his right to have a jury decide his sentence. Instead, the judge would be the one to decide whether he should get the death penalty or life in prison. Massacre also waived his right to present evidence in mitigation, which means evidence that might make the judge give him a lesser sentence. Sentencing was set for October 27th, 2017. In the weeks leading up to the sentencing, there were 2 days of sentencing hearings. During these hearings, Massacre's defense attorneys argued that he should receive a life sentence instead of the death penalty. They raised doubts about his mental health. They brought in a voodoo and religion expert who testified that Massacre felt compelled by the devil to kill his family. The expert tried to explain how Massacre's cultural and religious beliefs might have influenced his actions. But prosecutors were prepared with their own evidence. They convinced the judge that the murders were planned and premeditated. They showed evidence that Massacre had purchased the knife and duct tape at Walmart just before the murders. They pointed out that he had watched Gerline for over an hour before entering the house. They showed that he had time to think about what he was doing. The prosecutors also emphasized the brutality of the crimes. They described how Massacre had systematically gone through the house and killed each member of his family, one by one. They talked about the children, who ranged from 9 years old down to a baby who was barely more than a year old. They showed photos from the crime scene. The prosecution team included Deputy Chief Assistant State Attorney Richard Montecalvo, Chief Assistant State Attorney Amira Fox, and Assistant State Attorney Dave Scuderi. Amira Fox told the court that the cold, calculated, and premeditated quality made this case the exact type of case that was contemplated when Florida decided to have a death penalty. Gerline's family also testified during the sentencing hearings. Makindi Dieu, who was Gerline's brother and the uncle of the 5 murdered children, spoke. He appealed to the judge to honor my sister and her children. The family had been pushing for the death penalty from the beginning. They wanted justice for Gerline and the children. On October 27, 2017, Collier County Circuit Judge Christine Grider handed down her ruling. She sentenced Massacre Damas to death. Not just 1 death sentence, 6 death sentences, 1 for each victim. The sentences would run concurrently, which means at the same time, but Massacre received a separate death sentence for each murder. When Judge Grider was reading out the details of the murders and describing the gruesome nature of the crimes, Massacre was seen reaching across the table to grab tissues. He put the tissues in his ears so he would not have to listen to the description of what he had done. After the sentencing, Massacre was led out of the courtroom. In the hallway, members of Gerline's family hugged each other and shed tears. Makindi Dieu said, "The emotional roller coaster is over. After years of legal proceedings and waiting, the family finally had the sentence they had been asking for." Massacre's defense attorney, Kevin Shirley, spoke to the media after the sentencing. He said, "We were hoping for life in prison. The death sentence is barbaric, but you know, it is what it is, and it is the law in Florida for the time being." Massacre Damas became the 357th inmate on Florida's death row. He was sent to Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida, which is where male death row inmates are housed in Florida. But the case did not end with the sentencing. Massacre's attorneys continued to file appeals. They argued that Massacre had not been competent to stand trial. They argued that his guilty plea should not have been accepted because of his mental state. They argued that he had not received adequate legal representation. They raised questions about whether the trial court had properly evaluated his competency. In 2018, the Florida Supreme Court reviewed the case. The court looked at all of the arguments that Massacre's attorneys had raised. The Supreme Court ultimately upheld the death sentences. The justices pointed out that Massacre had been evaluated for competency 12 times by 5 different experts over the 8 years between his arrest and his sentencing. They noted that the trial court had issued multiple orders about his competency and had treated the issue with serious consideration. Justice Jorge Labarga wrote in a concurring opinion that the issue of Damas's competency was treated with the serious consideration required under Florida law. The court found that there was sufficient evidence to support the finding that Massacre was competent. Justice John Curiel, writing for the court, said that Massacre's claims of incompetence lacked evidence. The court rejected all of his appeals. In July 2023, a judge denied another post-conviction relief motion from Massacre. His attorneys tried again. In October 2025, the Florida Supreme Court once again reviewed Massacre's case. Once again, the court unanimously rejected his appeal. The justices dismissed his final appeal for a new trial. They ruled that the lower court's decision that Massacre was mentally competent and had adequate legal representation should stand. This ruling closed the door on more than a decade of legal challenges. As of January 2026, Massacre Damas remains on death row, at Union Correctional Institution. He is now 49 years old. Florida has not set an execution date for him. Post-conviction litigation continues, but his appeals have been exhausted at the state level. The Massacre case had a profound impact on the community in Naples and across Florida, particularly within the Haitian American community. Collier County is home to one of Florida's largest Haitian American populations. The brutality of the murders shocked everyone, but it especially resonated within the Haitian diaspora. The case ignited difficult conversations about domestic violence, mental health, and the pressures faced by immigrant families. These were topics that had often been discussed only in private, if at all. In Haitian culture, there can be a stigma surrounding domestic problems and mental illness. Families are expected to keep problems private. Asking for help from outside the family, especially from authorities, can be seen as shameful. But after the Damas murders, Haitian churches, advocacy groups, and nonprofits in Florida began launching initiatives to promote domestic violence awareness. They started offering counseling services. They started providing educational workshops in Creole. Haitian churches became central to outreach efforts. Church leaders were encouraged to use their sermons to address violence and family conflict. This marked a rare public conversation about issues that had traditionally been treated as taboo. For many Haitian Americans, the Damas case became a painful mirror reflecting the pressures faced by immigrant families. There is isolation that comes with being far from your home country. There are cultural conflicts. There are economic hardships. There is the stigma surrounding mental illness. Many immigrant families deal with stress related to adapting to life in a new country, dealing with language barriers, working low-paying jobs, and trying to maintain cultural identity while assimilating into American society. Advocates in South Florida said that the case fueled efforts to strengthen family counseling services and to educate new immigrants about the legal and social resources available to prevent domestic abuse. In response to the murders, Collier County expanded initiatives to improve threat assessment in high-risk domestic violence cases. There was already a program called the Intimate Violence Enhanced Service Team, or INVEST, which had been created in 2006. After the Damas case, enhancements were made to this program to better evaluate prior warnings in cases where there was a documented history of abuse and threats, like there had been with Massacre and Guerlain. The program had reviewed 1,581 reports and served 407 victims since its creation, and the improvements made after 2009 were designed to catch warning signs earlier. Today, the Damas case remains a painful reference point. It is remembered not only for the unimaginable violence, but also for how it galvanized communities to confront uncomfortable truths about family dynamics, faith, cultural pressures, and the need for better support networks. The case showed how silence around domestic problems can have tragic, irreversible consequences. Many see the court rulings and Massacre's death sentences as a form of justice for Guerlain and the 5 children, but they also see it as a renewed call to action, a call to confront domestic violence within their communities before it escalates to the point of no return. For the family members left behind, the loss is permanent. Guerlain was described by her family in a statement as the best mother, sister, and daughter in the world. She was caring and loving, and we miss her very much. The children, who would be young adults now if they had lived, never got the chance to grow up. Meshach would be in his mid-20s, Maven would be in his early 20s, Marvin would be in his early 20s, Megan would be a young adult, Morgan would be a teenager. Instead, their lives were cut short in the most brutal way imaginable by the man who was supposed to protect them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the third case breakdown. Case number 3. Vincent Brothers was born on May 31st, 1962. He grew up and went to college, eventually earning a bachelor's degree from Norfolk State University. He continued his education and received a master's degree in education from California State University, Bakersfield. By all accounts, Vincent was an ambitious man who wanted to succeed in his career. He started working in the Bakersfield City School District in 1987 as a substitute teacher. He worked his way up through the school system. By 1995, he had climbed to the position of vice principal at John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California. Bakersfield is a city surrounded by farms and oil fields in Kern County. It is a generally peaceful place where families raise their children and people know their neighbors. Vincent was well known in the community. He was seen as a responsible and determined educator. Parents respected him. Students looked up to him. He commanded respect from everyone around him. People described him as compassionate and patriotic. He seemed like the kind of person who would never hurt anyone. But Vincent had another side that most people did not see. He had been married multiple times before. In 1988, Vincent was convicted of misdemeanor spousal abuse. He received a 6-day jail sentence and was put on probation. He married for a second time in 1992. The following year, his wife sued for divorce. She claimed that Vincent had threatened to kill her and had been violent toward her. In 1996, Vincent sexually harassed a woman who worked at the school where he was vice principal. She claimed that during a visit to his home, he hit her. Police were involved, but they talked her out of filing a formal complaint against Vincent because he was considered a respected community leader. The school investigated the allegations. Vincent denied everything. He was warned that such behavior could affect his career, but he was not formally disciplined. By the late 1990s, Vincent was dating a woman named Joni Harper. Joni was 39 years old. She worked for the Bakersfield school system. She was also a Division I basketball official. Joni had a mother named Ernestine Harper, who was 70 years old. Ernestine was a civil rights activist. She was a mother of 5 children. She spoke out about gangs and gang activity in the community. Because of her activism, Ernestine had felt the backlash from people who did not like what she stood for. She owned a revolver for protection. Her home was very secure. It had a spiked fence around it. Every window had burglar bars. Every door had multiple locks. Ernestine was incredibly security conscious. Vincent and Joni had their first child together in 1998, a son named Marquez. They got married in January 2000. But the marriage did not last long. Vincent and Joni divorced in September 2001. The reason for the divorce was Vincent's infidelity. Vincent was having affairs with other women. Even after the divorce, Vincent and Joni continued to see each other on and off. They remained in each other's lives. In January 2003, they decided to give their relationship another try. At this point, Joni was pregnant with their 3rd child. They remarried in Las Vegas. They now had 3 children together. There was Marcus, who was 4 years old. There was Lindsay, who was 2 years old. And in May 2003, Joni gave birth to a baby boy named Marshall. Marshall was only 6 weeks old when everything fell apart. The remarriage started out promising, but problems quickly developed. Vincent and Joni began bickering at home. They argued frequently. Part of the problem was that Ernestine, Joni's mother, was living with them. Vincent and Ernestine did not get along. The tension in the house became unbearable. In April 2003, just 3 months after remarrying, Vincent moved out of the house. He and Joni were now estranged. They were living separately. But Vincent still saw the children. He was still involved in their lives to some degree. By this point, Vincent had been married 4 times in total. He had a surviving daughter named Margaret Kern Brothers from a previous relationship. Margaret was the daughter of a girlfriend Vincent had dated while he was attending California State University, Bakersfield. Despite being estranged from Joni, Vincent's financial obligations to his family were mounting. He had to think about alimony. He had to think about child support for 3 children. A decade before the murders, Vincent had gone to court to try to reduce his child support payments from a previous relationship. Money was clearly a concern for him. Prosecutors would later argue that Vincent saw his family as a financial burden. As time went on, Vincent continued to have multiple extramarital affairs. Investigators would later learn that Vincent was quite the ladies' man. Many of his relationships with other women were happening at the same time. They were concurrent, and they were occurring in the months leading up to the murders. In early July 2003, Vincent told his family and co-workers that he was going to Ohio to visit his brother Melvin for the July 4th holiday weekend. This seemed like a reasonable plan. Nobody thought anything of it. On July 2nd, 2003, Vincent flew from Los Angeles International Airport to Columbus, Ohio. He arrived in Ohio and told his brother Melvin that he was there to visit. But according to Melvin's later statements to police, Vincent was nowhere to be seen between July 5th and July 8th. Vincent had rented a car while he was in Ohio. It was a 2003 blue Dodge Neon. The rental was supposed to be for local use in the Ohio area, but Vincent had other plans. On Sunday, July 6th, 2003, Joni Harper attended morning church services with her 3 children and her mother Ernestine. It was the first time baby Marshall had been to church. He was only 6 weeks old. After the service, the family went out to lunch at a restaurant called the Black Angus. Then they returned home to Joni's house on 901 3rd Street in Bakersfield. The plan was to take a nap and rest before going back to church for the evening service. Joni and the 2 older children, Marquess and Lindsay, lay down on Joni's bed to nap together. Baby Marshall was in the room as well, under a pile of bedclothes. Ernestine was in another bedroom at the opposite end of the house. The house was quiet. Everyone was resting. But someone entered the house. Ernestine's home security measures, all the locks and bars and fences, had not been enough. The intruder had gotten inside. Nobody knows exactly what Joni and her family heard or felt in their final moments, but at some point, gunfire erupted inside the house. The intruder was armed with what investigators believed was a .22 caliber handgun. He also had a stabbing weapon. Ernestine was shot. She died in the hallway. She still had her revolver near her body, but she had not been able to use it in time. Joni was shot multiple times. But the killer did not stop there. After Joni was already dead from the gunshot wounds, the killer stabbed her repeatedly. This was overkill. It indicated a crime of passion. It showed rage and hatred. Marquez was shot. He was only 4 years old. Lindsay was shot. She was only 2 years old. Baby Marshall, who was only 6 weeks old and had attended his first church service just hours earlier, was also shot. All 5 family members were dead. 3 generations wiped out in a matter of minutes. After the murders, the killer tried to stage the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. The house was ransacked. Items were dumped out. Purses were emptied. It looked like someone had been searching for valuables, but there were problems with this staging. Valuables were left in plain sight. Cash was still there. Credit cards were still there. A television set was still there. If this had really been a robbery, those items would have been taken. Police would later determine that the crime scene had been staged. Whoever killed the Harper family wanted it to look like a home invasion or a burglary. But the evidence told a different story. After the murders, nobody heard from Joni or her family. They did not show up for the evening church service on Sunday. Monday came and went. Tuesday came. A family friend named Kelsey Spann became concerned. Joni had given Kelsey a key to her house. Kelsey decided to go check on her friend. She had not heard from Joni in days and feared something bad might have happened. On the morning of July 8th, 2003, Kelsey went to Joni's house. She used her key to open a side door. When she stepped inside, she was met with a horrific scene. There was blood everywhere. The walls were covered in blood. Kelsey saw Joni lying unresponsive on the bed with 2 of the children. She saw Ernestine lying in a pool of blood. She immediately called 911. Her voice on the recording was frantic. "She's laying on the bed, dead," she told the operator. When first responders arrived at the scene, they confirmed that all 5 people were dead. Police detectives arrived and began processing the crime scene. An initial medical examination showed that all the victims had multiple bullet wounds. Later, an autopsy would confirm that all 5 had died from close-range gunshot wounds. Joni had also been stabbed multiple times, even after she had already died from the gunshots. When detectives examined the scene, they noticed several things. The house appeared to have been ransacked, but nothing of value had been taken. There were no signs of forced entry. This was puzzling. How had the killer gotten in? Ernestine's house was supposed to be very secure. The crime scene looked like a robbery, but detectives suspected it had been staged. The question was, who would want to kill this entire family? Detectives began looking at people who were close to the victims. The first person who came to mind was Vincent Brothers. He was Joni's estranged husband. He was the father of 3 of the victims. He had a history of domestic violence and infidelity. Police needed to talk to him. Vincent was not in Bakersfield. He was supposed to be in Ohio visiting his brother. From Ohio, Vincent had traveled to North Carolina to visit his mother. Police contacted him there and informed him that his family had been murdered. Vincent agreed to meet with detectives. 2 detectives flew to North Carolina on the evening of July 8th to interview Vincent. He was waiting for them at a police station. When Detective Jeff Watts started to speak with Vincent about what had happened, Vincent's reaction was dramatic. He started to scream. He looked like he was going to vomit. He seemed shocked and distraught. The interview was going nowhere. Vincent was too emotional to provide useful information. The detectives ended the interview and released Vincent. He was not arrested. At that point, he was considered a person of interest, but police did not have enough evidence to charge him with anything. On July 9th, 2003, the day after learning about the murders, Vincent voluntarily turned himself in to authorities in North Carolina. He came to a police station on his own. Police questioned him again, but after a few hours they released him. There was not enough evidence at that time to hold him. Vincent's alibi initially seemed solid. Detectives checked his credit card records. The records showed that Vincent's credit cards had been used in Columbus, Ohio, on Sunday, July 6th, the day of the murders. His cell phone record showed that his phone had been pinging in Ohio during the same time period. It seemed impossible that Vincent could have been in 2 places at once. He appeared to be 2,000 miles away from Bakersfield when his family was killed. But detectives were not satisfied. Something felt wrong. They kept digging. As they looked deeper into Vincent and Joni's relationship, they discovered that the couple was estranged at the time of the murders. Because of Vincent's infidelity and other issues, there was bad blood between them. This gave Vincent a possible motive, but detectives struggled to understand why a father would kill his own children. What could possibly motivate someone to murder 3 innocent kids, including a 6-week-old baby? Detectives began constructing a timeline of Vincent's movements. They discovered that Vincent had flown to Ohio on July 2nd, 2003. They confirmed this through flight records. They also discovered that Vincent had rented a car while in Ohio. This was the blue Dodge Neon. Detectives obtained records from the rental car company. When they looked at the odometer readings, they found something shocking. The car had been driven approximately 5,400 miles. Some sources say 5,600 miles. Either way, it was far more mileage than a trip around the Ohio area would require. Detectives did some calculations. The distance from Columbus, Ohio to Bakersfield, California and back is approximately 4,000 to 4,500 miles. The car also had mileage from an additional trip Vincent had taken from Dayton, Ohio to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, which credit card records confirmed. The numbers matched up almost perfectly. Vincent could have driven from Ohio to Bakersfield, committed the murders, and driven back to Ohio. The timeline was tight, but it was possible. Detectives reached out to the Bakersfield community. They asked if anyone had seen Vincent in the area during the time the murders occurred. Witnesses came forward. Multiple people confirmed that they had seen Vincent in Bakersfield after July 5th. He had been in town. His alibi was falling apart. But detectives needed more evidence. Odometer readings and witness statements might not be enough to convince a jury. They needed something concrete. Then someone had an idea. It was an unprecedented move. Detectives contacted the FBI. Together, they obtained the rental car Vincent had used. They had it towed to a facility where it could be examined. Instead of just looking at the car, they decided to disassemble parts of it. They removed the radiator. They removed the air filter. Both parts were covered with dead insects. Hundreds of dead insects. Detectives sent the radiator and air filter to the Bohart Museum of Entomology at the University of California, Davis. They wanted an expert to identify the insects and determine where those insects were from geographically. The expert they contacted was Professor Lynn Kimsey. She was the director of the museum and a professor of entomology. She had been trained by world-renowned UC Davis entomologist Richard M. Bohart, who had founded the museum in 1946. Professor Kimsey had been identifying insects for more than 30 years. She was an expert in the field. When the FBI agents and a Bakersfield detective brought the car parts to her, covered in insect remains, Professor Kimsey saw it as a puzzle to be solved. She later said she had never heard of anyone doing this kind of analysis before. It was a completely novel approach to solving the murder case. Professor Kimsey spent considerable time examining the insect remains. She used specimens from the Bohart Museum's collection of 7 million insects to make comparisons. She consulted with other experts. She reviewed published papers and research. She identified several insect species from the car parts. One of the most significant finds was a large grasshopper. Professor Kimsey was able to identify the species by examining the leg of the grasshopper. She compared the size, coloration, and markings to specimens in the museum. The leg was red with black markings. Based on the size of the leg, she determined that the grasshopper had measured close to 2 inches long. This particular species of grasshopper is found in the Great Plains and on the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. It is found in areas west of the Rockies. It is abundant in California. This grasshopper does not exist in Ohio or anywhere in the eastern United States. Professor Kimsey also found a species of paper wasp on the car parts. She found 2 species of true bugs. A true bug is a specific type of insect in the order Hemiptera, with mouthparts adapted for piercing and sucking. All of these insect species are native to the western United States. Some are specifically native to the Bakersfield area or Southern California. They could not have been picked up by a car driving around Ohio. Professor Kimsey also noticed something interesting about the types of insects found on the car. There were no butterflies. This was unusual considering the car had apparently been driven in the summer. Butterflies are common in the summer. Their absence suggested that the car may not have been driven during daylight hours, but the car did have several moth pieces on it. It had other night-flying insects. This indicated that the car was likely driven at night. This fit perfectly with the prosecution's theory. If Vincent had driven from Ohio to Bakersfield to commit the murders, he would have wanted to avoid being seen. Driving at night made sense. Professor Kimsey concluded that based on the insects found on the car, the vehicle had been driven west. The insects were consistent with 2 major routes one could take to get to California from the east. The insect evidence corroborated with the mileage on the vehicle. The car had to have been driven west. There was no other explanation. Armed with this evidence, detectives also looked more closely at Vincent's credit card records and cell phone records. They started visiting the businesses where Vincent's credit cards had been used on July 6th in Ohio. They checked security camera footage from those locations. What they found was damning. It was not Vincent using the credit cards. It was Vincent's brother, Melvin. Melvin had been making purchases using Vincent's credit cards. Prosecutors would later allege that Melvin had helped Vincent by using his credit cards and forging Vincent's signature in Ohio on the day of the killings to help cover up the crime. As for the cell phone calls that had been made from Vincent's phone in Ohio, investigators believed that Vincent had left his cell phone with his family in Ohio. He had instructed them to make calls at different times to help strengthen his alibi. Vincent's credibility was now completely destroyed. On April 30th, 2004, nearly 10 months after the murders, Vincent Brothers was arrested. He was charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. There was also a special charge because of the multiple homicides. This special circumstance made Vincent eligible for the death penalty. Vincent pleaded not guilty. He maintained that he was innocent. He insisted that he had been in Ohio when his family was killed, and that he had nothing to do with the murders. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Vincent's trial began on February 22, 2007, in Kern County Superior Court. The trial was described as the biggest criminal trial in Bakersfield in decades. It drew national and international attention. A former vice principal and respected educator was accused of murdering his entire family. People could not understand how someone in his position could do something so heinous. The trial was moved forward in Bakersfield after a defense motion to change the venue to Los Angeles County was denied. Jury selection took place in early 2007. It extended over several days. Attorneys questioned potential jurors about their biases related to the death penalty and their exposure to media coverage of the case. Many potential jurors were dismissed for cause due to medical hardships or because they had already formed opinions about Vincent's guilt or innocence. The prosecution team was led by Kern County Deputy District Attorney Lisa Green. In her opening statements, Green laid out the prosecution's case. She emphasized the forensic evidence. She talked about the insects found on the rental car. She discussed timeline discrepancies in Vincent's alibi. She argued that Vincent had a motive. He had been having multiple extramarital affairs. His family was a financial burden to him. He was facing alimony and child support obligations. Green told the jury that Vincent had carefully planned the murders. He had flown to Ohio to establish an alibi. He had driven approximately 2,000 miles in a rental car back to Bakersfield. He had waited for his family to come home from church. He had killed them all. Then he had driven back to Ohio. The plan was elaborate, but the evidence showed that it had happened. Green asked the jury a pointed question. Who had the motive to kill the children? She told them to ask themselves this question over and over again. The answer, she said, was Vincent Brothers. During the trial, Green played the recording of the 911 call made by Kelsey Spann when she discovered the bodies. Joni's sister was in the courtroom. She sobbed quietly and shook in her chair as the recording played. It was heartbreaking to listen to. The defense team consisted of attorneys Michael Gardina and Anthony Bryan. They tried to argue that Vincent's alibi was solid. They presented witness accounts of Vincent's travel to Ohio. They tried to show that the timeline the prosecution had proposed was impossible. They even brought in a geographer who analyzed whether Vincent could have traveled the necessary distances within the time frame the prosecution claimed. The defense also tried to present Vincent in a positive light. They called character witnesses from his professional background. People testified that Vincent was a respected elementary school vice principal and teacher. They said he was a dedicated family man. They said he was compassionate and patriotic. They argued that someone like Vincent was unlikely to commit such horrible acts. But the prosecution had too much evidence. Over the course of the trial, which lasted several months, prosecutors called 137 witnesses. That is a massive number of witnesses for any trial. One of the most important witnesses was Professor Lynn Kimsey. She testified for 5 hours. She used a PowerPoint presentation to illustrate her findings. She showed the distribution of the insects on a United States map. She compared photos of insects from the car parts with specimens from the Bohart Museum. She explained how she had identified the large grasshopper by its leg. She showed the jury the size, coloration, and markings. She testified that the hind legs of grasshoppers help experts identify the species. She explained why the large red leg with black markings indicated a grasshopper that was close to 2 inches long. She testified that this species was only found in the West. The jury seemed very interested in what Professor Kimsey had to say. The defense tried to counter her testimony. They called 4 entomologists to testify for the defense. 3 were from Purdue University, and 1 was from the University of Illinois. These experts tried to make a case that insects can be easily distributed from one area to another. They also questioned Professor Kimsey's expertise. They questioned her work in diagnostics, systematics, field work, and publications. But it was evident to everyone in the courtroom that the defense witnesses did not have near the expertise or credentials of Professor Kimsey. The insect evidence was devastating to Vincent's case. Prosecutor Lisa Green would later say that the insect evidence corroborated perfectly with the mileage on the vehicle. The car had to have been driven west. There was no other explanation. Then Vincent made a critical mistake. Against the advice of many legal experts, Vincent decided to testify in his own defense. This gave prosecutor Lisa Green the opportunity she had been waiting for. She cross-examined Vincent on the witness stand, and Vincent did not hold up well under questioning. He became defensive. His answers were inconsistent. Green later told reporters that Vincent lied on the stand 41 or more times. She counted his lies. Vincent tried to deny involvement in the murders. But when Green pressed him about his extramarital affairs, Vincent did not lie about those. He admitted to being involved in multiple affairs. He admitted to cheating on Joni repeatedly. This admission made him look even worse to the jury. Here was a man who had no problem admitting to adultery, but who vehemently denied murdering his family despite overwhelming evidence. Vincent's testimony was described as displaying unsettling amorality. He came across as cold. He came across as someone who lacked empathy. The jury saw through him. After hearing testimony from all 137 witnesses, the jury deliberated. On May 15, 2007, the jury returned with their verdict. Vincent Brothers was found guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. The conviction carried the special circumstance of multiple murder. This meant that Vincent was eligible for the death penalty. The trial then moved to the penalty phase. The jury had to decide whether Vincent should be sentenced to death or to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On May 29, 2007, the jury returned with their sentencing recommendation. They recommended death. The final decision rested with the judge. On September 27, 2007, Superior Court Judge Michael Bush formally sentenced Vincent Brothers to death. Judge Bush followed the jury's recommendation. He also ordered Vincent to pay restitution to the victims' families. During the sentencing hearing, Vincent's only living daughter, Margaret Kern Brothers, made a statement to the court. Margaret was Vincent's daughter from a previous relationship. She was an adult at the time of the trial. Margaret told the court that she planned to stop using her father's last name. She said, "I am leaving my name with him. I do not have a father now." Margaret had disowned her father. She was so disgusted and ashamed by what he had done that she wanted nothing to do with him anymore. She would later change her surname. During the sentencing proceedings, Judge Bush denied a defense request for a new trial. He also scheduled a hearing to determine whether Vincent's defense attorneys should be held in contempt of court. The attorneys had been accused of impugning the court's integrity in court filings and asking a witness questions that the judge had prohibited. This added another layer of controversy to an already contentious trial. After the sentencing, Vincent Brothers was transported to San Quentin State Prison. He arrived there on the afternoon of September 27, 2007. San Quentin is the oldest prison in California. It is where male death row inmates are housed. Vincent was placed in a 6-foot by 10-foot cell. The cell was furnished with a mattress, a toilet, a sink, and a towel rack. This would be Vincent's home for the foreseeable future. He would be housed alongside more than 500 other people in California who face the death penalty. Vincent was one of the few death row inmates with little criminal history and a master's degree. Under California law, All death penalty convictions are automatically appealed to the state Supreme Court. Vincent's case has been in the appellate process ever since his conviction. The legal process has been slow. Both attorneys who represented Vincent at trial have since died. Lisa Green, the prosecutor who convicted Vincent, has retired and moved away. The court reporters who transcribed the trial have also retired. In June 2024, there was a hearing in Kern County Superior Court about Vincent's case. The subject of the hearing was the transcript from the 2007 trial. The appellate court had decertified the transcript. This meant that Kern County Superior Court staff had to compile information, make corrections, and determine what else the appellate court needed before sending back a new, complete record for further review. Among the items missing from the record were notes that had been sent from the jury to the court during the trial. Judge Michael Bush, who had presided over the original trial, noted several difficulties in completing the record. With key players in the case having died or retired, reconstructing a complete and accurate record became challenging. As of January 2026, Vincent Brothers remains on death row. But he is no longer housed at San Quentin State Prison. He is now housed at a facility in Stockton, California. He is now 62 years old. California has not executed anyone since 2006. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order placing a moratorium on the death penalty in California. This moratorium will remain in place for as long as Newsom is governor. This means that even though Vincent has been sentenced to death, he will not be executed while the moratorium is in effect. His death sentence remains in place unless it is overturned on appeal. But even if the appeals fail and the moratorium is eventually lifted, Vincent may never be executed. California's death penalty system is notoriously slow. Inmates often spend decades on death row before their cases are fully resolved. Vincent has already been on death row for over 17 years. He could spend another 17 years or more waiting for his case to work through the appeals process. The case of Vincent Brothers remains one of the most notorious crimes in Kern County history. It stunned the community when it happened. People could not understand how a well-respected educator, someone who worked with children every day, could murder his own family in such a brutal way. The insect evidence that helped convict Vincent was groundbreaking. It was the first time forensic entomology had been used in this particular way to solve a murder case. The work of Professor Lynn Kimsey and the Bohart Museum of Entomology became a landmark example of how creative investigative techniques can crack even the most carefully planned crimes. For the Harper family, justice has been served in the form of Vincent's conviction and death sentence. But no amount of justice can bring back Joni, Ernestine, Marquez, Lindsay, and Marshall. 5 lives were taken on July 6, 2003. 3 generations of a family were wiped out in a matter of minutes. The community of Bakersfield lost 5 of its members, and Vincent Brothers, who might have spent his life as a respected educator making a positive difference in children's lives, will instead spend the rest of his days on death row for committing one of the most heinous family massacres in California history. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the 4th case breakdown. Case number 4. Gurpreet Singh was born around 1983 in Punjab, a state in northern India. Punjab is where Sikhism was founded 500 years ago. Sikhism is the 5th largest religion in the world. It is a monotheistic faith that believes in equality and service to humanity. Gurpreet was raised as a Sikh. His parents were Karam Singh and Daljit Kaur. They lived in a small village called Manupur in Punjab. Gurpreet was their only son. As a boy, Gurpreet worked on the family farm. He studied hard to learn English. His mother later said that he was never a problem as a child. He liked to study and work. She said he had good behavior. Gurpreet's father said that his son was kind to everyone. The family was very proud of Gurpreet. Like many young men from Punjab, Gurpreet dreamed of coming to America. He wanted what people call the American dream. He wanted to build a better life and have more opportunities than he could find in India. Around the early 2000s, Gurpreet came to the United States. He became a United States citizen in 2009. Gurpreet settled in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. He got married to a woman named Shalinderjeet Kaur. She was also from Punjab. Shalinderjeet was known to her friends and family as Shalinder. She worked in the community and was well liked. Gurpreet and Shalinderjeet had 3 children together. They were married for 17 years. By all outward appearances, they seemed like a normal immigrant family, working hard to build a life in America. Gurpreet became a truck driver. Truck driving is a common profession for Punjabi immigrants in America. There is a large Sikh population working as truck drivers across the United States. Gurpreet started out driving trucks for other companies. Eventually, he became self-employed. He ran his own trucking company. Truck drivers work long hours. They drive across the country transporting goods. It is hard work, but it can pay well. Gurpreet worked long hours and made decent money. He was known as a hard worker. People who knew him said he was kind and never violent. He followed the Sikh faith. He wore a turban as part of his religious practice. At some point, Shalinderjeet's parents came to live in America as well. Her father was Hakikat Singh Panag. He was 59 years old. Some sources spell his name as Hakikat or Hakiakat. Her mother was Parmjit Kaur. She was 62 years old. Parmjit had a sister named Amarjit Kaur. She was 58 years old. Amarjit had 2 sons named Gary Hans and Jasdeep Singh. The family all lived in the Cincinnati area. By early 2019, they had been living in Cincinnati for 11 years. Gurpreet and his family lived in an apartment in Westchester Township, Ohio. The apartment was in a complex called Lakefront at Westchester. The address was on Wind Tree Drive. Westchester Township is located about 20 miles north of Cincinnati. It is a suburb with a population of about 62,000 people. Violent crime is rare in Westchester. It is generally a safe and peaceful place where families live. But Gurpreet's marriage was having problems. He and Shalinderjeet were not getting along. Part of the problem was that Hakikat, Shalinderjeet's father, was living with them. Hakikat had developed problems with alcohol. He drank too much. When he drank, he became loud and argumentative. His drinking got so bad that eventually Hakikat moved to a different apartment, away from the family. But the family tensions remained. Gurpreet also had a strained relationship with Hakikat over money. Hakikat and Paramjit owned land in India. There was a land deal happening in India that involved money. Gurpreet expected to benefit from this money. But his relationship with his in-laws had become so bad that they were planning to keep the money away from Gurpreet. This created a lot of tension in the family. Despite these problems, Gurpreet was making plans for the future. He had put down a large deposit for a house in Indiana. The house had 5 bedrooms. Gurpreet chose Indiana because it was at the crossroads of truck stops where loads are dropped off or reloaded. As a truck driver, this location made sense for his work. Gurpreet was also initiating the process to sponsor his parents to immigrate to America from India. The plan was for Hakikat and Paramjit to move in with Gurpreet and his family in the new house in Indiana. Everything seemed to be moving forward, but there was a secret that Gurpreet was keeping, a secret that would tear the family apart. Around 2011, Gurpreet met a woman named Navkiran Kaur. Navkiran was from Indianapolis, Indiana. She was married at the time to a man who was also a truck driver. Gurpreet met Navkiran through her husband. The 3 of them knew each other through the trucking community. At first, Gurpreet and Navkiran were just friends, but over time, their relationship became closer. Navkiran was having problems in her marriage. Her husband was abusive. She was going through a difficult time. Gurpreet would check on her. He would text her and call her. He provided emotional support during her struggles. Navkiran got divorced around 2017 or 2018. After her divorce, The relationship between Gurpreet and Navkiran became sexual. They started having an affair. Gurpreet was still married to Shalinderjit. He had 3 children at home, but he was carrying on a romantic relationship with Navkiran in Indianapolis. Navkiran knew that Gurpreet was married. She knew he had 3 children, but the affair continued anyway. Gurpreet and Navkiran would see each other once or twice a week. They talked on the phone every day. They sent messages back and forth constantly. From mid-December 2018 through April 28, 2019, there were 183 phone calls between Gurpreet and Navkiran. They talked about marriage. Navkiran testified later that Gurpreet had asked her if she would marry him if he was single. She said that if her parents agreed, she would consider it. Gurpreet was spending a lot of money on Navkiran. He helped her buy a house in Indianapolis. He gave her $20,000 for the down payment. The house was in the same subdivision where Gurpreet was planning to move his own family. He also gave Navkiran an Audi SUV to drive. He paid for the car insurance. He paid for everything. Over the course of the affair, Gurpreet spent almost $45,000 on Navkiran. This was creating serious financial problems for Gurpreet. His bank accounts were dwindling. He was running out of money. But he kept spending on Navkiran. In March 2019, everything came crashing down. Shalinderjit opened a bank statement. She found a $20,000 check made out to Navkiran Kaur. Shalinderjit knew who Navkiran was. She knew that Navkiran was a divorced woman who lived in Indiana. But she did not know that Navkiran was having an affair with her husband. She confronted Gurpreet about the check. Gurpreet did not deny that he had given Navkiran the money, but he also did not tell Shalinderjit that Navkiran was his girlfriend. Shalinderjit was devastated. She felt betrayed. She felt sad and defeated. Her friends from her Gurudwara, the Sikh place of worship, said that Shalinderjit seemed very unhappy after this discovery. But Shalinderjit did not want to get divorced. She did not leave Gurpreet. She stayed in the marriage. But now the family knew about Navkiran. They knew that Gurpreet had given her a huge amount of money, and they were angry. The family was already planning to keep the money from the land deal in India away from Gurpreet because of his strained relationship with Hakikat. Now, with the discovery of the affair and the money he had given to Navkiran, they were even more determined to cut him out of any financial arrangements. Gurpreet's marriage was falling apart. His finances were a disaster. His relationship with his in-laws was terrible. And the woman he was having an affair with was waiting for him in Indianapolis. The pressure was building on Gurpreet, and he was about to make a terrible decision. On April 28, 2019, Gurpreet made arrangements for his 3 children to stay with his cousins. He wanted his children out of the apartment that evening. His cousins agreed to take the kids. The children were safe with the cousins. They were not at the apartment on Windtree Drive that night. Around 9:11 p.m., Gurpreet arrived at the apartment complex. This was documented by GPS records from his car. The GPS showed exactly when he pulled into the parking lot. At this time, Shalinderjit, Hakikat, Paramjit, and Amarjit were all inside the apartment. They were going about their evening. They had no idea what was about to happen. Gurpreet entered the apartment. He had a gun with him. It was a 9mm handgun. The serial number on the gun had been drilled off. Someone had used a drill bit to completely remove any and all serial numbers from the gun. They showed that the attack was premeditated. Someone had planned ahead to make the gun untraceable. What happened next was a massacre. Gurpreet shot his wife, Shalinderjit. She was shot in the head. Gurpreet shot his father-in-law, Hakikat. He was shot in the head. Gurpreet shot his mother-in-law, Paramjit. She was shot in the head. Gurpreet shot his aunt-in-law, Amarjit. She was shot in the head. All 4 victims were shot execution style. One of the victims was shot while sleeping. One of the victims was shot while trying to escape. Each victim was shot at least twice. In total, the 4 victims were shot 16 times. The crime scene was horrific. There was blood everywhere. The apartment was soaked in blood. Prosecutors would later say that Gurpreet methodically shot family member after family member after family member. He moved through the apartment, killing everyone. After the murders, Gurpreet took the gun and threw it off the balcony into a pond behind the apartment. The distance from the balcony to the pond was about 36 feet. The gun landed in the water and sank to the bottom. Gurpreet then went back into the apartment. He waited. According to GPS data, Gurpreet was in the parking lot of the apartment complex for 29 minutes before he called 911. He did not call for help right away. He waited. At 9:25 p.m., Navkiran Kaur started sending Gurpreet messages on WhatsApp. She sent message after message. Gurpreet did not respond. Over the next 15 minutes, Navkiran sent 12 WhatsApp messages to Gurpreet. He never answered any of them. At 9:40 p.m., Gurpreet called 911. He told the 911 dispatcher that he had just gotten home. He said he found his family on the ground and bleeding. He said everybody inside was deceased. He said he needed help. When police arrived at the scene, they found Gurpreet outside the apartment. He was covered in blood. His clothes were soaked in blood from head to toe. Even his socks were bloody. Sergeant Travis Oakes was one of the first officers on the scene. His body camera recorded his interaction with Gurpreet. On the video, Gurpreet can be heard screaming. He is saying, "Somebody call my kids." He appears very emotional. He seems distraught. Officer Oakes asked Gurpreet if his wife was one of the people inside. Gurpreet confirmed that she was deceased. He said everybody inside was deceased. Police entered the apartment and found the 4 bodies. All 4 victims had been shot to death. The scene was gruesome. There was blood everywhere. Police immediately began investigating. They talked to Gurpreet at the scene. They asked him what happened. Gurpreet told them he had just gotten home and found everyone dead. He said the door was open when he arrived. He said he saw his mother-in-law bleeding on the ground first. Then he saw his wife. Then he saw his aunt. Then he saw his father-in-law on the bed. He said he tried to talk to them, but they would not respond. At no point during this initial conversation did Gurpreet mention anything about intruders. He did not say anything about masked men. He did not say anything about seeing anyone else. He just said he came home and found everyone dead. Less than 2 hours after the 911 call, police took Gurpreet to the Westchester Police Department for questioning. He was not under arrest at the time. The police called it a soft interview. They wanted to hear Gurpreet's full account of what happened. Detective Randy Ferris conducted the interview. Gurpreet was still wearing his blood-soaked clothes. Police photographed him in these clothes. The blood covered every part of his clothing. Gurpreet told the detective that he had been out that day. He walked the detective through his entire day. He explained what he had been doing. He said he came home and the door was open. He said he found everyone dead. He said he touched his wife and tried to help her. During the interview, Gurpreet was emotional. He kept saying, "Please help my family." But again, he did not mention seeing any intruders. He did not mention masked men with baseball bats. His story was simply that he came home and found everyone dead. Before Gurpreet left the police station that night, officers swabbed his hands. They were testing for gunshot residue. Gunshot residue is microscopic particles that are left on a person's hands after they fire a gun. The test came back positive. There was gunshot residue on Gurpreet's hand. This linked him directly to the shooting. Police also took Gurpreet's cell phone. They wanted to examine it. When forensic specialists extracted data from the phone, they made an important discovery. Gurpreet had deleted calls to Navkiran Kaur from his call log on April 28th. The calls were there in the phone's data, but they had been marked as deleted. Someone had intentionally deleted those messages. This was suspicious. Why would Gurpreet delete calls to Navkiran on the night of the murders? Police also examined the clothes that Gurpreet was wearing. They found blood on the clothes, but when the blood was tested for DNA, they only found a confirmed DNA profile for Shalinderjeet. They did not find DNA from Hakikat, Paramjeet, or Amarjeet. This was strange. The crime scene was incredibly bloody. If Gurpreet had shot all 4 victims at close range, there should have been blood spatter from all 4 people on his clothes. But only Shalinderjeet's blood was found on him. The defense would later use this fact to argue that Gurpreet could not be the killer. But prosecutors had a different explanation. They said that Gurpreet touched and held his wife after the shooting, which would explain her blood being on him. And they said the absence of the other victim's blood did not prove his innocence. Police continued their investigation. They learned about Gurpreet's affair with Navkiran. They learned about the $45,000 he had spent on her. They learned about the strained relationship with his in-laws. They learned about the land deal in India and how the family was planning to keep money away from Gurpreet. They looked at Gurpreet's cell phone records. They looked at GPS data from his car. They looked at Google location data. All of this data showed that Gurpreet had arrived at the apartment at 9:11 p.m. But he did not call 911 until 9:40 p.m. That was a 29-minute gap. Gurpreet had lied to the 911 dispatcher when he said he had just gotten home. He had actually been there for almost half an hour before he called for help. Police also found mortgage documents inside the apartment. The documents had Gurpreet's name on them. They also had Navkiran Kaur's name on them. The documents showed the $20,000 transaction. This was physical evidence inside the apartment connecting Gurpreet to Navkiran and the money he had given her. Prosecutors believed they knew what had happened. They believed that Gurpreet had made arrangements to have his children stay with his cousins so they would be safe. Then he went to the apartment. He shot and killed his wife and her 3 family members. He threw the gun in the pond. He waited 29 minutes. Then he called 911 and pretended he had just arrived home. The motive, prosecutors believed, was a combination of his affair with Navkiran, his financial troubles, and his anger at his in-laws for planning to cut him out of the money from the land deal in India. After the murders, Gurpreet stayed with his cousins. He told them he was devastated. But he never mentioned anything about being home during the murders. He never mentioned seeing masked intruders. His story to them was the same as what he told police. He came home and found everyone dead. On July 2nd, 2019, Gurpreet was arrested. He was not arrested in Ohio. He was arrested at a Walmart in Bradford, Connecticut. Gurpreet had traveled to Connecticut for a family wedding. Police had been tracking him. When he left the residence where he was staying and went to the Walmart, police moved in. They arrested him in the Walmart parking lot. Gurpreet was arraigned in Superior Court in New Haven, Connecticut. He waived extradition back to Ohio. He did not enter a plea. Gurpreet spent about a month in the New Haven County Jail. Then he was extradited back to Ohio. He was placed in the Butler County Jail. He has been held there ever since without bond. Gurpreet was officially charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder. The charges came with specifications for using the firearm and for killing 2 or more persons. These specifications made Gurpreet eligible for the death penalty if he was convicted. When Gurpreet was arrested, he told his family that he did not do anything. He said he had no clue why he was arrested. He maintained his innocence. His parents back in India believed him. They stood by their son. But the other side of the family, the relatives of the victims, said they knew from minute 1 that Gurpreet was the murderer. They said the dual motives were his desire to marry Navkiran and his desire to inherit Hakikat and Paramjit's land. Some family members believed that Gurpreet married Shalinderjeet to get a green card, and so that she would inherit land from her father. They believed that when Gurpreet realized Hakikat was not dying anytime soon, he decided to kill everyone. Gurpreet's trial was delayed multiple times. First, the COVID-19 pandemic caused delays. Court proceedings were shut down for safety reasons. Then there was legal maneuvering. Attorneys needed time to prepare. Gurpreet's case was complicated. Finally, In October 2022, more than 3 years after the murders, Gurpreet's trial began. The trial took place in Butler County Common Pleas Court. The judge was Gregory Howard. Gurpreet was 40 years old at the time of the trial. He faced the death penalty if convicted. The prosecution team included Assistant Prosecutors Josh Munich and John Marshall. They spent 10 days presenting their case. They called many witnesses. One of the key witnesses was Navkiran Kaur. Navkiran was now 35 years old. She had remarried and recently had a baby. She did not want to be photographed by media in the courtroom. She testified with the help of a Punjabi interpreter. Navkiran told the jury about her affair with Gurpreet. She admitted that they had a sexual relationship. She admitted that Gurpreet gave her $20,000 for a down payment on a house. She admitted that he gave her an Audi SUV and paid for the insurance. She said they had talked about marriage. She said Gurpreet asked her if she would marry him if he was single. She said she told him that if her parents agreed, she would consider it. During cross-examination, Navkiran said that Gurpreet was kind and never violent. She said he loved his family. The defense tried to use her testimony to show that Gurpreet was a good person who would never commit murder. But the prosecution used her testimony to establish motive. They argued that Gurpreet wanted to be with Navkiran. He wanted to start a new life with her, but his wife and his in-laws were standing in the way. So he killed them. The prosecution presented the cell phone data. They showed that Gurpreet arrived at the apartment at 9:11 p.m., but did not call 911 until 9:40 p.m. They showed that Gurpreet deleted calls to Navkiran from his phone. They showed the gunshot residue on his hand. They showed the mortgage documents with Navkiran's name. They argued that all the evidence pointed to one person and one person only. That person was Gurpreet Singh. The prosecution's theory was simple. They said the victims were alive until Gurpreet got home. They said that based on cell phone data, location data from the GPS in his car, and Google location data, Gurpreet arrived at the apartment and waited 30 minutes before calling 911. They said he used that time to shoot everyone and throw the gun in the pond. They said Gurpreet lied to protect himself. They said he lied about just getting home. They said he lied about not knowing what happened. The defense team at the first trial consisted of attorneys Charlie M. Ritgers and J.R. Burnens. They argued that Gurpreet was innocent. They presented a very different theory of what happened. The defense said that Haqiqat, the father-in-law, had financial problems. They said Haqiqat was involved in a dubious land contract deal in India with the land mafia. The defense argued that the murders were part of a professional hit. They said 3 masked men broke into the apartment with baseball bats. They said Gurpreet ran out of the apartment for his life. When he came back, everyone was dead. The defense pointed out that only Shalindarjeet's blood was found on Gurpreet's clothes. They said there was no blood from the other 3 victims. They argued that if Gurpreet had shot all 4 people at close range, there should have been blood spatter from all 4 victims on him. The defense called a blood spatter expert named Christopher Robinson. Robinson was a former crime lab director for the city of Atlanta. He ran a forensics consulting firm. Robinson testified that based on DNA evidence, Gurpreet could not be the killer. He said it would be impossible for a shooter to come in and shoot 4 people and only have one person's DNA on him. He said the only DNA on Gurpreet could be accounted for by him holding his wife after he found her. He said there was no way and no evidence to conclude that Gurpreet was the shooter. But prosecutors attacked Robinson's credentials and credibility. When Robinson was questioned on the stand, he admitted he had been fired from his job with the Atlanta Crime Lab. This damaged his credibility with the jury. The defense also pointed out that Gurpreet had no criminal past. He was a hard worker. He followed the Sikh faith. He loved his family. They showed body camera footage where Gurpreet could be heard screaming, "Somebody call my kids." They tried to show that Gurpreet was genuinely emotional and distraught. They argued that a man who just committed mass murder would not react this way. During closing arguments, The defense attorney, Charlie Ritkers, gave 14 reasons for reasonable doubt. He said that lying to police is not a crime. He said it is not a reason to convict someone of murder. He reminded the jury that in the United States, people do not have to talk to police. But the prosecution's closing arguments were powerful. They said the victims were alive until Gurpreet got home. They said Gurpreet's marriage and finances had unraveled because he spent almost $45,000 on his affair with Nav Kiran. They said the family found out and planned to keep money from the land deal away from him. They said this drove Gurpreet to murder. They said all the evidence led to one person and one person only. That person was Gurpreet Singh. The jury began deliberating on October 19, 2022. They deliberated for a long time. After almost 12 hours, the jury came back into the courtroom. They told Judge Howard that they were not able to unanimously reach a verdict. The judge asked if there was a possibility they could reach an agreement with more time. The foreperson said yes. The judge sent them back to deliberate more, but after 14 hours of total deliberation, the jury remained deadlocked. They could not agree. On October 21, 2022, Judge Howard declared a mistrial. The final vote was 11-1. 11 jurors voted guilty. 1 juror voted not guilty. The one dissenting juror was the only person of color on the jury. Because the verdict had to be unanimous and the jury was deadlocked, there was no verdict. Gurpreet would have to be tried again. The victims' family members were devastated. They had traveled thousands of miles to attend the trial. Many of them lived out of state or out of the country. They had sat through 3 weeks of testimony. They had heard horrific details about what happened to their loved ones. And then they had to deal with the emotions of a hung jury. They felt like justice had not been served. But the prosecution was determined to try Gurpreet again. Butler County Prosecutor Michael Moser announced that they would retry the case. After the mistrial, there were more legal proceedings. Gurpreet's attorneys from the law firm Ritkers and Ritkers were permitted to withdraw from his case. Gurpreet could no longer afford to pay them. He was declared indigent. This means he did not have enough money to pay for his own legal defense. The judge appointed new attorneys to represent Gurpreet. These attorneys had specialized training in capital cases. Eventually, Gurpreet hired another set of new attorneys named Mark Wichorik and Alexandria Deerdorf. In November 2023, Gurpreet made a very unusual decision. He waived his right to a jury trial. Instead of having another jury decide his fate, Gurpreet opted for a 3-judge panel. This meant that 3 judges would hear the evidence and decide if he was guilty or innocent. A death penalty case before a 3-judge panel is very rare. The last time this happened in Butler County was 13 years earlier. The 3-judge panel consisted of Judge Greg Howard, Judge Keith Spaeth, and Judge Greg Stevens. Just like in a jury trial, the verdict by the 3-judge panel had to be unanimous in the guilt phase. In the sentencing phase, if all 3 judges did not unanimously vote for death, the sentence would be life without parole or some other lesser sentence. Gurpreet's retrial began on April 29, 2024. The trial lasted 10 days. The prosecution and defense presented their cases again. Many of the same witnesses testified. Nav Kiran Kaur testified again about the affair. Police officers testified about the investigation. Forensic experts presented their findings. The defense strategy was similar to the first trial. They admitted that Gurpreet had an affair with Nav Kiran. They admitted he gave her money and a car. They now admitted that Gurpreet was home at the time of the murders, but they maintained that he was not the one who shot and killed his family. They said he was a witness, not the killer. The defense called only one witness during the retrial. Gurpreet did not take the stand in his own defense. On May 10, 2024, after a 10-day trial, the 3-judge panel began deliberating. They deliberated for about 2 hours. Then they returned with their verdict. The 3 judges unanimously found Gurpreet Singh guilty on all 4 counts of aggravated murder. Gurpreet was convicted of murdering his wife, Shalinderjeet Kaur, his father-in-law, Hakikat Singh Panag, his mother-in-law, Parmjeet Kaur, and his aunt-in-law, Amarjeet Kaur. When the guilty verdicts were read, the victims' family members wept. They had waited 5 years for this moment. They had been through so much. Many of them had traveled from around the country and around the world multiple times to attend hearings and trials. Finally, justice had been served. After the verdict, the case moved to the sentencing phase. The judges had to decide whether Gurpreet should be sentenced to death or to some form of life in prison. By law, the options were 25 years to life in prison, 30 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole, or a death sentence. On May 13, 2024, a mitigation hearing was held. This is where the defense presents reasons why the judges should not impose the death penalty. Gurpreet's parents testified via video streaming from India. Karam Singh and Daljit Kaur spoke about their son's life as a boy and a young man in India. They talked about how he worked on the family farm. They said he studied hard to learn English. They said he was kind and had good behavior. They said he was never a problem as a child. They said he loved his family. Defense attorney Mark Wichorik pointed to Gurpreet's lack of criminal past. He noted that Gurpreet had been a hard worker until his arrest. He said Gurpreet loved his family and followed the Sikh faith. He said Gurpreet had been a model prisoner while at the Butler County Jail. A correction officer named Roger McIlvaine testified that Gurpreet was always cool and calm in jail. He said Gurpreet always held his head high and was well-spoken. He even said Gurpreet stuck up for other inmates. The defense argued that all of these factors were reasons to impose a life sentence rather than death. A mitigation specialist presented an opinion that Gurpreet does not present with significant risk factors to reoffend. The defense was trying to convince the judges that Gurpreet deserved mercy. But the prosecution painted a very different picture. They reminded the judges of the horrific nature of the crimes. Judge Greg Howard would later say when reading the decision that the victims were all shot execution style. They were all shot in the head. One victim was shot while asleep. One victim was shot while trying to escape. The prosecution emphasized that Gurpreet had methodically shot family member after family member after family member. They said he showed no mercy. The 3-judge panel deliberated for about 45 minutes on May 13th. They could not reach a decision that day. They decided to return on May 14th for more deliberation. On the morning of May 14th, 2024, the 3 judges deliberated for about 2 more hours. Then they returned to the courtroom with their decision. The 3 judges unanimously voted to impose the death penalty on all 4 counts. Gurpreet Singh was sentenced to death 4 times, once for each victim. When the death sentences were announced, Gurpreet showed no emotion. He just looked straight ahead at the judges. The victims' family members prayed quietly as the sentence was read. After the sentence decision, Ajaib Singh, whose sisters Parmjit and Amarjit were killed, said he agreed with the 4 death sentences. He said, "I know it is symbolic, but it is right." Amarjit's sons, Gary Hans and Jasdeep Singh, said they felt the presence of their deceased family members in the courtroom. They said the 4 members of their family were standing there. Butler County Prosecutor Michael Gamoser said that the judges followed the evidence and followed the law. He said they did their job. He thanked the staff and investigators for sticking with the case. He said it had been a tremendous emotional upheaval for everyone involved from the very beginning. On May 22, 2024, Gurpreet was formally sentenced. The death sentences will run concurrently, which means at the same time. Gurpreet was also sentenced to 4 3-year gun specifications for shooting each victim. These gun specifications will run consecutively, which means one after another. That adds up to 12 years. So Gurpreet's full sentence is 4 death sentences plus 12 years. As required by law, the judges set an execution date. The execution date was set for November 27, 2024. When asked if he wanted to address the court, Gurpreet declined. He said nothing. As Gurpreet left the courtroom, family members of the victims yelled at him in Punjabi. According to an interpreter, they said, "Did you enjoy it? Now go and enjoy your last meal." Gurpreet did not respond. By law, all death penalty convictions in Ohio are automatically appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court. In July 2024, Gurpreet filed an appeal. He is asking the state's top court for a stay of execution while his legal team tries to overturn his conviction. The state is not opposing the stay, pending the Ohio Supreme Court's resolution of his direct appeal. Gurpreet now has 3 attorneys from the Ohio Public Defender's Office in Columbus representing him. His case will go through the lengthy appeals process, but it is unclear if Gurpreet's death sentence will ever be carried out. Ohio has a moratorium on executions. This moratorium has been in place since December 2020. Governor Mike DeWine halted the death penalty in Ohio. He said there were not enough lethal injection drugs available. He said the state needs lawmakers to pick an alternative execution method. So far, they have not done this. In February 2025, Governor DeWine announced that he was postponing all executions scheduled for 2025. He predicted that no one would be put to death during the remainder of his time in office, which ends in 2026. The last prisoner put to death in Ohio was Robert Van Hook. He was 58 years old and from Sharonville, Ohio. He was executed on July 18, 2018. That was more than 6 years ago. Van Hook was executed more than 30 years after murdering a man he met in a bar in downtown Cincinnati. There are currently 119 death row inmates in Ohio, with a combined 121 death sentences pending. From 1981 through December 31, 2023, 336 people have received a combined 341 death sentences in Ohio. Of those, only 56 sentences have been carried out. That is just 1 in every 6 death sentences. On average in Ohio, a condemned inmate spends more than 21 years on death row before an execution date is set. This is mostly due to the numerous avenues for appeal. Ohio juries have not returned a death sentence in 3 years before Gurpreet's case. Recent polls indicate most Ohioans favor other sentencing options over the death penalty. So even though Gurpreet has been sentenced to death, he may never actually be executed. He could spend decades on death row while his appeals work through the system. And if the moratorium continues, he may die of natural causes before the state ever carries out his execution. The case of Gurpreet Singh is one of the most notorious family massacres in Ohio history. The Sikh community in the area was deeply affected by the murders. The community was divided. Some people believed Gurpreet was innocent. They believed the defense theory about the land mafia and the professional hit. They believed 3 masked men had killed the family. But others believed Gurpreet was guilty from the start. They believed the prosecution's case. The evidence against Gurpreet was strong. The cell phone data, the GPS data, the deleted calls, the gunshot residue, the financial motive, the affair, all of it pointed to Gurpreet as the killer. The 3-judge panel found him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. For the victims' families, the death sentences brought a sense of justice. But they also know that justice delayed is justice denied. They have already waited 5 years. They may wait many more years before anything is final. The appeals process will drag on. There will be more court hearings, more legal arguments, more waiting. In the meantime, Gurpreet sits on death row. His 3 children are growing up without their father and without their mother. They lost their entire family on April 28, 2019. Shailenderjeet, Hakikat, Paramjeet, and Amarjeet are gone. 4 lives were taken that night. 3 generations of a family wiped out. And Gurpreet Singh, the man who came to America chasing the American dream, will spend the rest of his life behind bars for one of the most heinous family massacres in Ohio history. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. We now move on to the final case in this video, case number 5. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois. His parents were Loretta and William Simmons. Ronald was their second son. He also had a younger sister named Nancy Ellen Simmons, who was born on February 4, 1942. On January 31, 1943, when Ronald was just 2 years old, his father William died of a stroke. This was a traumatic event for the family. Within a year of William's death, Ronald's mother Loretta remarried. Her new husband was William D. Griffin. Griffin worked as a civil engineer for the United States Army Corps of Engineers. In 1946, when Ronald was about 6 years old, the Corps transferred Griffin to Little Rock, Arkansas. This was the first of many moves the family would make. Over the next decade, the Corps transferred Griffin multiple times, and the family moved across central Arkansas several times. This meant Ronald grew up without much stability. He was constantly moving and changing schools. On September 15, 1957, when Ronald was 17 years old, he dropped out of school. He joined the United States Navy. His first station was Bremerton Naval Base in Washington State. It was there that Ronald met a young woman named Bersabe Rebecca Ulibari. Everyone called her Becky. Ronald and Becky started dating. On July 9, 1960, Ronald and Becky got married in New Mexico. They would stay married for 27 years. Over the next 18 years, Ronald and Becky had 7 children together. They had a large family. Ronald served in the Navy for about 3 years. Then in 1963, he left the Navy. About 2 years later, around 1965, Ronald joined the United States Air Force. He would serve in the Air Force for many years. Ronald was a good soldier. During his 22-year military career, he earned several commendations and awards. He was awarded a Bronze Star for his service. He also received the Republic of Vietnam Cross for his service as an airman during the Vietnam War. Ronald was recognized for his excellent marksmanship. He received the Air Force Ribbon for this skill. Over time, Ronald worked his way up through the ranks. By the time he retired, he had reached the rank of Master Sergeant. On November 30, 1979, Ronald retired from the Air Force. He was 39 years old. He had served his country for over 2 decades. After retirement, Ronald needed to figure out what to do with his life. He had a wife and 7 children to support. The family moved to New Mexico. Ronald got a job as a civilian employee at Holloman Air Force Base in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. The family settled into life in Cloudcroft, but there were dark secrets inside the Simmons household. Ronald was an abusive and controlling husband and father. People in the community remembered him as someone most people feared. One friend of his daughter's later said that Ronald had a beer in his hand all the time. She said he had one little room he would stay in all the time. It was dark and seemed spooky, and it stunk. Ronald isolated his family. He did not let his children have normal social lives. He forbade them to visit friends or play outside. The children were kept separate from the community. And behind closed doors, Ronald was committing terrible crimes against his own daughter. Ronald had been sexually abusing his daughter Sheila for years. Around 1981, when Sheila was about 17 years old, she became pregnant. The father of her baby was her own father, Ronald. People in town started to notice that Ronald was giving Sheila more than friendly kisses goodbye each morning when she left for school. Eventually, a school counselor talked to Sheila. Sheila admitted that she was pregnant with her father's baby. On April 3, 1981, the Cloudcroft, New Mexico Department of Human Services began investigating Ronald Simmons. They were looking into allegations that he had fathered a child with his 17-year-old daughter. Charges were filed against Ronald. Stephen K. Sanders was the district attorney in Alamogordo, New Mexico at the time. In August 1981, Ronald was indicted for impregnating Sheila. But before Ronald could be arrested, the Simmons family disappeared. They fled New Mexico in the middle of the night. The house was found abandoned. Ronald was added to the National FBI computer as a wanted fugitive. But he was never found. The charges against him remained pending, but he had escaped. Sheila gave birth to a baby girl. The baby was named Sylvia. Sylvia was both Ronald's daughter and his granddaughter. This innocent child was the product of incest and abuse. The Simmons family first moved to Ward, Arkansas in late 1981. Then, in the summer of 1983, they moved again to Dover, Arkansas. Dover is in Pope County. The family purchased 13 acres of land on a property that would become known as Mockingbird Hill. The property was very isolated. It was in the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. The Simmons home was constructed from 2 old model mobile homes that had been joined together to form one large home. The home did not have a telephone. It did not have indoor plumbing. There was no running water inside the house. The property was surrounded by a makeshift privacy fence. In some places, the fence was as high as 10 feet tall. There was a no trespassing sign posted at the bottom of the road leading to the property. The family was completely cut off from the outside world. Local residents were baffled by the Simmons family. Ronald was an unsmiling man with a piercing stare. He kept his children isolated. The 4 younger children attended school in Dover, but they were not allowed to have friends or participate in normal activities. The family lived in poverty, despite Ronald having a military pension. They had no modern conveniences. They had to use outhouses for bathrooms. Ronald worked a string of low-paying jobs in the nearby town of Russellville. Russellville is in Pope County, just like Dover. It is a town of about 14,000 people. It sits along the Arkansas River Valley. Russellville is home to Arkansas Tech University, so it is a college town. Ronald got a job working as an accounts receivable clerk at a company called Woodline Motor Freight. But Ronald had to quit this job after numerous reports of inappropriate sexual advances toward female coworkers. Ronald had been making unwanted advances toward women at work. One woman in particular was a woman named Joyce Butts. Joyce worked as an office manager at Woodline Motor Freight. Ronald became obsessed with her. But Joyce was not interested in Ronald. She rejected his advances. Ronald also had confrontations with his supervisor at Woodline Motor Freight, a woman named Kathy Kendrick. Kathy had yelled at Ronald during an argument about pay. After leaving Woodline Motor Freight, Ronald went to work at a Sinclair Mini-Mart convenience store in Russellville. He worked there for approximately a year and a half. On December 18, 1987, Ronald quit his job at the Sinclair Mini-Mart. At this point, Ronald was 47 years old. His wife, Becky, was in her late 40s. Their 7 children were now adults or teenagers. Some of the older children had moved away and started their own families. But 4 of the younger children still lived at home. By late 1987, Becky had reached her breaking point. She had been living with Ronald's abuse for 27 years. She had been kept isolated from her own family. Her brother, Abe Ulibarri, later said that after Ronald impregnated their daughter Sheila in 1981, everything got worse. Ronald started secluding Becky even more and kept her away from her relatives. Becky had written to her son saying, "I do not want to live the rest of my life with Dad. I am a prisoner here, and the kids too. Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." A family friend later told investigators that Becky had been secretly saving up money. She was planning to divorce Ronald. She was finally going to leave him. When Ronald found out that Becky was planning to leave him, something inside him snapped. He made a decision. He was going to kill everyone. Shortly before Christmas, 1987, Ronald decided to kill all the members of his family. In the days leading up to the murders, Ronald had his children dig a hole in the backyard. He told them it was for a 3rd outhouse. The children dug a pit that was about 4 feet deep. But Ronald was not planning to use it as an outhouse. He was planning to use it as a grave. On the morning of December 22nd, 1987, Ronald put his plan into action. That morning, Ronald's oldest son, Ronald Gene Simmons Jr., came to visit. Ronald Jr. was 29 years old. He lived in San Antonio, Texas. He had come to Russellville to pick up his 3-year-old daughter, Barbara Jean. Barbara had been staying with her grandparents while Ronald Jr. stabilized his life after a divorce. Ronald Jr. had been talking about this trip home for as long as 3 weeks. He was excited to bring Barbara Jean back to Texas with him. It was going to be a special Christmas reunion. But Ronald Jr. and Barbara Jean would never leave Mockingbird Hill alive. That morning, Ronald shot his wife, Becky. He beat her with a heavy object and then shot her to death with a .22 caliber pistol. Ronald also shot his son, Ronald Jr. He beat him and then shot him. Then Ronald strangled his 3-year-old granddaughter, Barbara Jean. He strangled the life out of the innocent little girl. Ronald took all 3 bodies and threw them into the cesspit that the children had dug. He covered them up. Then Ronald waited. The 4 younger Simmons children were away at school that day. It was December 22nd, which was the start of their Christmas break. The school bus was going to drop them off at home that afternoon. Ronald waited for them to arrive. The 4 children who came home that day were Loretta, who was 17 years old, Eddie, who was 14, Marianne, who was 11, and Rebecca, who was 8 years old. When the children arrived home, Ronald told them he had presents for each of them. But he said he wanted to give them their presents one at a time. He called them individually. Based on crime scene investigation, police believe that the children were separated and killed individually. Ronald strangled each child. Some of the children were also drowned. Loretta was beaten, strangled, and then drowned in a rain barrel outside the house. The other 3 children, Eddie, Marianne, and Rebecca, were given very similar treatment. They were beaten, strangled, and drowned. Ronald methodically killed each of his 4 younger children, one by one. Their bodies were placed in and around the property. Some were put in abandoned cars on the property. Some were left in the cesspit. Ronald had now killed 7 members of his family on December 22nd. His wife, his oldest son, and all 5 of his children who had been present that day. But Ronald was not done. He had more family members to kill. 4 days later, on December 26th, 1987, Ronald invited more family members to come to Mockingbird Hill for an after-Christmas dinner. The older Simmons children had been asked to come visit. They were bringing their spouses and children. They were coming to celebrate Christmas with the family. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The first to arrive were Ronald's son William, who went by Billy. Billy was 23 years old. He came with his wife, Renata Mae Simmons, who was 21 years old. They brought their 20-month-old son, whose name was Trey. Billy, Renata, and Trey arrived at the house expecting a family celebration. Instead, Ronald shot Billy and Renata. Their bodies were left by the dining room table. Ronald covered their bodies with their own coats and some bedding. Then Ronald strangled and drowned little Trey, who was not even 2 years old yet. Ronald took Trey's body and placed it in the trunk of a car behind the house. Next to arrive were Ronald's daughter Sheila and her husband Dennis Raymond McNulty. Sheila was 24 years old. Dennis was 33. They brought their 2 children with them. One child was 7-year-old Sylvia Gale. Sylvia was the daughter of Sheila and Ronald. She was the product of incest. Sylvia was both Ronald's daughter and his granddaughter. Sheila and Dennis also had a 21-month-old son named Michael. When Sheila and her family arrived, Ronald shot Sheila. He laid her body on the dining room table and covered it with a tablecloth. Ronald shot Dennis. Then he strangled and drowned the 2 children, 7-year-old Sylvia and 21-month-old Michael. In a matter of hours on December 26th, Ronald had killed 7 more people. He killed his son Billy, his daughter Sheila, their 2 spouses, and 3 grandchildren. The house was now filled with bodies. 14 members of Ronald's family were dead. The victims ranged in age from 21 months old to 47 years old. Ronald had killed his wife, 4 of his adult children, 3 of his teenage and young children, 2 of his children's spouses, and 4 of his grandchildren. It was the worst family mass murder in United States history. After the killings on December 26th, Ronald did something shocking. He drove to a Sears store in Russellville. He picked up Christmas gifts that he had ordered but that had not arrived before the holiday. He was picking up Christmas presents for people he had just murdered. Then Ronald went to a private club in Russellville. He had a drink. He acted like everything was normal. Then he drove back home to Mockingbird Hill. He waited out the weekend. The bodies of his family members were decomposing inside and around his home. But Ronald just waited. He had more killing to do. On Monday morning, December 28, 1987, Ronald got up and prepared for the final part of his plan. He drove a car that had belonged to his son Ronald Jr. to Russellville. His first stop was a Walmart store. At Walmart, Ronald bought a second gun. He now had 2 .22 caliber pistols. Then Ronald began his rampage through Russellville. His first stop was the law office of Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons. Ronald entered the building. Inside, he found a woman named Kathy Cribbins Kendrick. Kathy was a receptionist and secretary at the law firm, but Ronald knew her from his previous job. Kathy had been Ronald's supervisor at Woodline Motor Freight. She was the woman who had yelled at Ronald during an argument about pay. Ronald shot Kathy. She died at the scene. Ronald left the law office and drove to his next location. He went to the Taylor Oil Company. Taylor Oil was connected to the Sinclair Mini-Mart where Ronald had worked. The owner of the Mini-Mart, a man named Russell Rusty Taylor, was at the Taylor Oil Company office. Ronald entered and shot Rusty Taylor. Rusty was wounded, but survived. Ronald also shot and killed a man named J.D. Chaffin. J.D. went by Jim. He was a fireman and a part-time truck driver for Taylor Oil. Jim Chaffin was shot and killed. Ronald shot at another employee but missed. Then Ronald left Taylor Oil. He went to his next target, the Woodline Motor Freight Company. This was where Ronald had worked before the Sinclair Mini-Mart. This was where he had made unwanted sexual advances toward women. Ronald entered the Woodline Motor Freight office. He found Joyce Butts, the office manager he had been obsessed with. Joyce had rejected Ronald's advances. Ronald shot Joyce. She died from her wounds. Ronald shot at other people in the office. He wounded several people. In total, during his rampage through Russellville, Ronald shot 9 people. He killed 2 people, Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. He wounded 4 other people, including Rusty Taylor. The whole rampage took about 45 minutes. When Ronald was done, he went to find a secretary at Woodline Motor Freight. He surrendered to her. He said, "I have gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." He waited there for the police to arrive. When police arrived, Ronald handed over his 2 .22 caliber revolvers. He surrendered without any resistance. Russellville Police Chief J.D. Yancey took Ronald into custody. Ronald was arrested and taken to the police station. Police did not yet know about the 14 bodies at Mockingbird Hill. They knew Ronald had shot people in Russellville, but they did not know the full extent of what he had done. Police tried to contact Ronald's family to notify them of his arrest, but nobody answered at the Simmons home. There was no telephone at the property, so police could not call. On December 28th, after Ronald's arrest, Sheriff Jim Bolin and other officers decided to drive to Ronald's home in Dover to check on the family. 2 officers made the drive out to Mockingbird Hill. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The property was desolate and isolated. It was surrounded by a tall makeshift fence. There was no phone and no plumbing. The officers entered the property. They immediately knew something was very wrong. They found bodies inside the house. They found bodies outside the house. They found bodies in abandoned cars. They found bodies in the cesspit. In total, they discovered 14 bodies. All 14 were members of Ronald's family. The officers were shocked. They had never seen anything like this. Sheriff Bolin later told reporters that one major unanswered question kept running through his mind. Why? Why would a man kill his entire family? The scene at Mockingbird Hill was thoroughly processed by investigators. The Arkansas State Police were brought in. The FBI joined the investigation because of their expertise in tracking out-of-state witnesses and conducting background checks. Forensic teams documented everything. Dr. Bennett G. Preston, the assistant medical examiner for Arkansas, performed autopsies on all 14 bodies. The autopsies revealed that most of the victims had been killed by strangulation. Some had also been shot. Some had been drowned. The children had been strangled and drowned in a rain barrel or other containers. The bodies had been soaked in kerosene. Ronald had done this because he believed it would stop the smell from coming out of the ground and attracting animals and people. The investigation also revealed that no firearms were found at the Simmons home. Ronald had taken the guns with him when he left to go to Russellville. As police learned more about the Simmons family, they began to understand the dark secrets that had been hidden at Mockingbird Hill. They learned about the incest. They learned about the abuse. They learned that Becky had been planning to divorce Ronald. They learned that Sheila had revealed to people that Ronald was the father of her daughter Sylvia. All of this helped investigators understand Ronald's possible motives. But even with all this information, the question of why remained difficult to fully answer. On December 30th, 1987, prosecutor John Bynum filed 2 counts of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder for the victims shot in Russellville. Bynum said he would seek to have Ronald executed if he was found guilty on the capital charges. Bynum also said he would eventually file charges against Ronald for the deaths of his 14 family members. Ronald was being held without bond. On December 30th, Ronald was transferred from the Pope County Detention Center to the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock. Circuit Judge John Patterson ordered that Ronald be held without bond and undergo a psychiatric evaluation. Ronald was admitted on an emergency basis to Rogers Hall, which housed the criminally insane. He arrived under heavy security because there were threats on his life. Dr. Roy Ragdale said hospital policies allowed patients to be admitted early if they were charged with a capital crime. Ronald was evaluated by Dr. Irving Quo, a staff psychiatrist. Dr. Quo found that Ronald was sane and capable of standing trial. Despite the horrific nature of his crimes, Ronald was mentally competent to understand the charges against him and to assist in his own defense. The court appointed 2 attorneys to represent Ronald. Their names were Robert E. Doc Irwin and John Harris. John Bynum would be the prosecuting attorney. Ronald would face 2 separate trials. The first trial would be for the murders committed in Russellville on December 28. The second trial would be for the 14 family members killed at Mockingbird Hill. On January 15, 1988, Ronald was formally charged with 2 counts of capital murder for the deaths of his 14 family members. 1 count was for the 7 family members killed before Christmas on December 22nd. The other count was for those killed on December 26th. The Russellville trial came first. Jury selection took less than 6 hours. On May 12, 1988, in Franklin County Circuit Court, a jury convicted Ronald of capital murder for the deaths of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin. On May 16, 1988, Judge John Samuel Patterson sentenced Ronald to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years in prison. After being sentenced, Ronald made a statement under oath. He said, "I, Ronald Gene Simmons Sr., want it to be known that it is my wish and my desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal or in any way change this sentence." Ronald refused all rights to appeal. He wanted to die. The second trial for the 14 family members was scheduled to begin. On December 21, 1988, Judge Patterson issued an order moving the trial to Clarksville in Johnson County because of pretrial publicity. The 14 deaths had been consolidated into one count of capital murder. The trial began in February 1989. During opening arguments, prosecutor John Bynum said the prosecution would present a note by Ronald that authorities found in a safe deposit box at People's Bank in Russellville. Bynum said the note would show a motive for why Ronald killed some of these people. He said it would describe a love-hate relationship with his oldest daughter, Sheila, with whom he had fathered a child. Bank records showed that Ronald opened the safe deposit box several times during the Christmas holidays. Inside the box, investigators found an undated letter. The letter was written to Sheila. In the letter, Ronald expressed anger that Sheila had revealed he was the father of her child, Sylvia. Ronald wrote that he would see Sheila in hell. During the trial, when prosecutor Bynum presented this letter as evidence, Ronald became enraged. He jumped up and punched Bynum in the face. Then Ronald tried to grab a deputy's handgun. Officers rushed to subdue Ronald. He was removed from the courtroom in chains. This violent outburst happened right as the jury was about to go into deliberation. It was a very bad thing for the jury to witness right before they decided Ronald's fate. On February 10, 1989, Ronald was found guilty of 14 counts of capital murder for the deaths of his family members. On March 16, 1989, Judge Patterson sentenced Ronald to death by lethal injection. Ronald again waived all rights to appeal. He wanted his execution to happen as quickly as possible. In court, Ronald said, "In my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Ronald chose lethal injection as his method of execution. An execution date was set for March 16, 1989. But Ronald's execution did not happen as scheduled. Another death row inmate named Jonas Whitmore filed a legal challenge to stop Ronald's execution. Whitmore was also on death row in Arkansas. He had been convicted of stabbing to death a 62-year-old woman and robbing her of $250. Whitmore wanted to see Ronald's case appealed within Arkansas. Whitmore believed that if Ronald's case was appealed, it might help his own case. Whitmore argued that if his own appeals were successful and he got a new trial, during sentencing, his single murder would look far less bad compared to Ronald's massacre of 16 people. Whitmore's legal team argued that Ronald not appealing his case violated the Constitution's protections against cruel and unusual punishment. A reverend named Louis Franz also joined the petition. They contended that Ronald, using his right to refuse appeal, jeopardized the appellate rights of other death row inmates. On March 15, 1989, the United States Supreme Court issued a stay of execution to give time to consider the case. Ronald was watching television and eating what he thought would be his last meal when the news of his stay of execution was announced. His execution was delayed. Other prisoners on death row were upset that Ronald was not fighting his death sentence. They believed it hurt their own cases. Ronald had to be separated from other prisoners on death row because his life was constantly being threatened. The case of Whitmore versus Arkansas went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. On April 24, 1990, the Supreme Court ruled in a 7-2 decision. Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote for the majority. The court ruled that Whitmore had no standing to intervene in Ronald's case. The court held that the 8th and 14th Amendments do not require mandatory appellate review of death penalty cases. The court also held that individuals cannot file cases as a next friend unless there is a prior relationship to the person, and unless that person is unable to litigate their own cause due to mental incapacity, lack of access to court, or other similar disability. Whitmore's claim of injury was rejected. He could not prove that Ronald's appeal would change the outcome of a future sentencing review for Whitmore. The Supreme Court ruled that while Ronald had the right to appellate review, it did not violate the 8th Amendment for Ronald to choose not to request appellate review. Therefore, Whitmore had no cause for action. The net effect of the ruling was that the only person who could stop Ronald's execution was Ronald himself. and Ronald did not want to stop it. On May 31st, 1990, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton signed a new death warrant for Ronald. The execution was scheduled for June 25th, 1990. This was almost 2 years after the original execution date. There would be no more obstacles. Ronald was going to die. In the days leading up to his execution, Assistant Attorney General Jack Gillian said that Ronald could stop the execution at any time, up to the point of the lethal injection, by saying he wanted to pursue his right to an appeal. But Ronald never changed his mind. He wanted to die. Ronald never expressed any remorse for his actions. Acquaintances suggested that his silence reflected a desire to retain control over his family, even after death. He shared very little with authorities about why he did what he did. The question of why remained largely unanswered. On June 25, 1990, Ronald Gene Simmons was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit in Arkansas. He was 49 years old. For his last meal, Ronald requested a chef salad, cherry Kool-Aid, and strawberry ice cream. Before his execution, Ronald gave a brief final statement. He said, "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." His statement was confusing. One of his attorneys, John Harris, said he thought Ronald accepted his punishment, but felt that it had been delayed for too long. 14 people were present in a darkened witness room to watch the execution. 2 witnesses were reporters. One was Bob Simmons, who was the Associated Press bureau chief. The other was Scott Bowles from the Arkansas Gazette. At 9 p.m., the curtains over the windows of the execution chamber opened without notice. Light from the bare white room brightened the witness room. Ronald lay strapped to a gurney about 8 feet from the first row of witnesses. His head was to the witness's left and his feet to the right. 2 intravenous bottles hung over his head. The lethal injection procedure began. Ronald was executed and pronounced dead. He became the first person executed by lethal injection in Arkansas. Arkansas had not carried out an execution since 1964. Ronald's execution marked the resumption of capital punishment in the state after a 26-year hiatus. The speed of Ronald's trial and execution was notable. Only 757 days passed between his arrest on December 28, 1987, and his execution on June 25, 1990. That is just over 2 years. At the time, only Gary Gilmore had been executed more quickly following sentencing during the modern era of capital punishment. After Ronald's execution, his body needed to be buried, but no surviving relatives were willing to claim his body. Ronald had not provided any specific burial instructions. With no one to claim him, Ronald was buried in a pauper's grave at Lincoln Memorial Lawn Cemetery, near the Varner Unit in Lincoln County, Arkansas. Details of the burial arrangements were not disclosed until 20 minutes before the service. Ronald's sister, Nancy Madden, and members of her family were present at the graveside ceremony. But they did not claim the body. They were just there to see him buried. In mid-August 1990, about 2 months after Ronald's execution, Judge Patterson authorized the destruction of evidence from the case. 3 videotapes from the murder scenes at the Simmons property were burned. The tapes had captured the horrific scene at Mockingbird Hill, but they were no longer needed. The case was closed. Ronald was dead. The case of Ronald Gene Simmons is considered the worst family mass murder in United States history. 14 members of one family were killed by the same person in a matter of days. The killings shocked the nation. In total, Ronald killed 16 people. 14 were family members. 2 were co-workers in Russellville. He also wounded 4 other people. The victims ranged in age from 21 months old to 47 years old. The innocent victims included Ronald's wife of 27 years, 6 of his children, 2 of his children's spouses, and 4 of his grandchildren. Among the dead were children who had been strangled and drowned, toddlers who were barely old enough to walk, a newborn who had just experienced his first Christmas, teenagers who never got to grow up, young adults who had their whole lives ahead of them. All of them were taken by Ronald in a calculated killing spree. The case raised many questions. How could such a family live and work in a small town, and no one noticed the signs of obvious dysfunction? How could a school system see these children on a daily basis and notice nothing odd psychologically, emotionally, or socially? The answer is that Ronald kept his family isolated. He built fences around his property. He posted no trespassing signs. He forbade his children from having friends or participating in normal activities. The family had no phone, so people could not easily reach them. Ronald had complete control over his family, and when he felt that control slipping away, when his wife was planning to leave him, he decided to kill everyone rather than let them go. The surviving members of the Simmons family, including Ronald's oldest son, who was serving in the Air Force at the time of the murders, faced immense trauma and grief. They struggled to comprehend the horrific actions of their father and grandfather. They struggled to cope with the loss of so many loved ones. Ronald Gene Simmons spent the rest of his life showing no remorse. He never apologized. He never explained why he did what he did. He simply said he wanted to die for his crimes. And on June 25th, 1990, he got his wish. The execution of Ronald Gene Simmons remains one of the fastest executions in modern American history. His crimes remain the deadliest family massacre in United States history, and his name remains synonymous with one of the most evil acts ever committed during what should have been a joyful holiday season. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.